Hey, this is Ross Payton with Role Playing Public Radio. This is RPPR episode 71. You've got wild talents. With me, as always, is Tom Church.
Yeah, I'm here. I am here propping you up.
Yep, that's what you do. Like any good co-host. So,
I do what I'm told.
Aw.
It's the Nuremberg defense of co-hosts. I follow orders.
We're straight to Godwin's Law there, Tom. Right off the bat. This episode is off to a great start.
Well,
which actually got to make sense because Wild Talents came out of Godlike, which is the World War II superhero RPG. In this episode, we're going to be talking about Wild Talents, a one-roll engine superhero game. We've been playing a long campaign of it on the RPPR actual play, The Heroes of New Arcadia. For this episode, I actually interviewed Greg Stolze over Skype about Wild Talents at length, so we'll have that in there. So this will be a double-length episode. I know we're going to a monthly. Well, we have been a monthly scheduled podcast, but so we're just giving you a little more for your bang for your podcasting download dollar, whatever.
Because that's what we do for people.
Yeah, we're here for you, the fans. So yeah, this will be a great episode.
It will.
It will
be best,
except for all the other episodes.
They're even awesomer.
Yeah. So in this episode, also we have some news up front. First off. I have been writing quite a bit lately, and
he has.
And I've decided, you know me as the zombie guy from Zombies of the World, but there's more to me than just zombies.
I mean, not much more, but
there's fantasy. I'm a big fan of the fantasy genre, as those of you who like the New World campaign will be sure to realize. So I decided to undergo sort of an experiment in writing. I've started a fantasy serial slash novel called The Heretic Cycle, and I'll have with this episode out, I'll have the first episode of The Heretic Cycle, the first segment of it out, called Hunted. It's on Amazon and Smashwords. I have the links in there. You can see the cover in our show notes, which was done by the very talented Ian Moody. And basically, The Heretic Cycle is... Tom's already read it.
Yes, I have.
The first segment is a story not about a hero, but about a villain. It's about the kind of guy who builds dungeons, undergoes great schemes, performs evil, powerful magical rituals, and kills parties of adventurers. Not just singular adventurers, but whole groups of them to further his...
Well, let's be honest.
Yeah.
Most of our group, us groups, have it coming.
Yeah, this is true. So
we steal and we loot in the name, and we kill in the name of righteousness.
Right. So that's the idea with the Heretic Cycle. So if you want to read about this character who goes through a number of aliases, I call him Akil in this first segment. Well, he'll be that for pretty much this entire first novel. Then go ahead and pick it up. Will be a fun experiment to see if people want to listen, or read my fantasy writing. So
and it's got kobolds in it.
It's got kobolds in it.
And you can't go wrong with them.
Right, exactly. So
if you don't like kobolds, kill yourself.
Yeah. In other news, the Killsplosion for version 1.0 is out. As I'll have a big link in the show notes for this episode, killsplosion.roleplayingpublicradio.com. You can download the PDF. I'll be updating the PDF incrementally. So even though I've gotten a lot of feedback from playtesting, and I've revised and tweaked the game, and Tom has some great stories in it. Violet has done some great art for it.
Art great in simplicity.
Yeah. Of guys exploding and killing and exploding. Killsplosion. There will be... I will continue to tweak the rules.
I just got it.
I know.
Killsplosion.
It's very...
Son of a bitch!
I know. It's layers upon layers of complexity.
My mind is blown.
So this is a very PvP, player versus player oriented game. I'll be playtesting new scenarios and new material out, and then I'll get this on once. So this will be the version 1.0, but I'll continue to update the rules.
Unless I can make a comment, I've noticed that we played a session of this, and our group, I think we play together pretty well, work together. Killsplosion taught me that, but deep down, we really just want to frag each other. I mean, hard.
Yeah. So if you want to try that out with your group, now is your chance. Download it and see what
and reveal what you really think of your friends.
Yeah. And let's see here. Just on a minor side, I got an invitation to the Dota 2 beta on, or alpha, or whatever you want to call it, on Steam. So I am a total newbie. I have no idea what I'm doing other than it's to try and kill the other players. So yeah,
We're not exactly talking rocket science.
yeah,
here.
no, I'm very bad at Dota. But it's fun so far, yeah.
For now,
yeah. And then finally, I was a guest on the Drunken Ugly podcast again to answer questions about game design, which actually I bring up with Greg Stolze. The listener on their podcast wanted to know, like, how much math do you have to do to make game designs good? I was like, yeah.
more than you want to.
No, it's the opposite, especially like White Wolf. Like, we got into this in the World of Darkness, for example. Like, the older World of Darkness, there are two ways of modifying difficulty for a task. You could either raise or lower the target number, like instead the default was rolling a 6 on a D10. You could make it like, oh, it's easy. You need to roll a 5 or a 4. Or it's really hard. You need to roll an 8. Or you
need more than one.
Well, no, it's not even that.
Or you can drop one of the dice total.
Yeah, you can raise or lower the dice total. So there's two different mechanics for adjusting difficulty. And like Greg would ask them, what's the difference between those? And they're like, I don't know.
Yeah.
So it's like whatever the game developer felt like that day. So, and like mathematicians figured out in the old World of Darkness, the more dice you had to pull out, the more likely it was you would botch. So, like, yeah, because of the way botching worked.
So yeah, you could actually have a 5 in your attribute and a 5 in the skill that goes with it, and screw up more often than you succeed.
Exactly. So they're. Math, game design, yeah, not as much as you think. So, but if you want to hear the whole answer from the Drunk and the Ugly, I'll put a link up there so you can check me out. Being a jackass on there, they're very professional and sophisticated.
Unlike us.
Yeah, exactly. They're the Drunk and the Ugly. What about that does not scream professionalism and
sophistication,
rarefied taste, and sophistication? Thank you, Tom.
You're welcome, Ross.
So
I'm sorry. You're welcome.
Yeah, we are just.
Let's go drink some moonshine.
That's all we do.
Watch some Fox News.
Yeah.
Yeah, I went there too.
I know you're.
That.
Quite the cutting edge comedian there.
I do what I can.
So, anyways, even though I've recorded the Greg Stolze interview about Wild Talents first, I've already done that. Tom and I are going to talk about it first, and then it's kind of a lead into the interview. The interview is over an hour, so I know you guys want to listen to.
Get a soda.
Well, Tom, it's all about Tom. I know Tom has the greatest fan base, and I'm just the monster. So
Well, every monster has to have a hero, Russ.
Oh, I see. I see how it is.
It's clearly not me, though. I don't know why they keep bringing me up.
Yeah, it's clearly Aaron. Aaron's the true hero of RPPR.
Yeah, except he's the true villain in most of her games. But that's another topic.
That is. So let's talk about Wild Talents. Wild Talents is a one-roll engine game. There is a setting for it in the hardcover edition. But if you get the $10 paperback edition...
That's everything you need to know.
Yeah, the hardback is nice to have, but that has all the mechanics. So it's, universal superhero role-playing game. So one of the first things I think that we've talked about before and we should talk about right now is for those of you who are unfamiliar with One Roll Engine and Wild Talents in particular, is the learning curve, because that's obviously the very first thing you encounter in this system. And this is one of the things I talk about with Greg a little bit. But I'm just going to say it very politely. Tom, you can rephrase it however you want. I'm going to say it has a very, what shall we say, a front-loaded learning curve.
Indeed.
And what would you?
I will say this: I first learned of this system on the way back from Gen Con. I think it was 2 years ago.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was Gen Con of 2010. I believe is when I first saw this.
Yeah.
And of course, I do what I normally do when I'm driving back from Gen Con: is you sit there reading the books you've written while I have to drive. That you bought. Sorry,
or got.
I'm sorry. Yeah. And then as I'm driving, and then your ass gets to fall asleep while I have to drive the whole way.
Yeah.
You son of a bitch.
Yeah.
But you're checking this book out, and I do have a tendency, I kind of, if it's something interesting, I keep glancing over as I'm flying down the highway at 80 miles an hour.
Yeah.
But I was asking about that, it says, and you explained to me, you didn't have it quite down yourself either.
Yeah.
But you were just kind of feeding me stuff that you were reading from it. And I admit, like, that sounds like madness.
Yeah. Because we'd already played Monsters, Not the Childish Things, which is also one roll engine, but
Different way of building.
Well, Monsters is essentially a kitified, well, not kitified, but simplified version of Wild Talents. They strip everything. I mean, you still have the attack, defend, useful for powers, but everything in there is drastically, simplified. And in Wild Talents, it's not simplified at all. So,
no, it's right there.
Power creation and the mechanics.
So, and I'll say when we but it was then 2011 by the time we finally sat down to do a game.
Yeah, we started actually January last year.
And everyone pretty much had the same reaction I did, which was, what the hell, what is this? What do these advantages and flaws even mean?
Yeah.
There was a lot of that.
Yeah.
And, I think there's I forget who it was, but there's one other person in the group, I think, besides you, that kind of knew the system. Not well, but enough to give advice.
Yeah.
And really, towards the first few sessions, I was like, I don't know if I'm going to get this. Did I even do these powers right?
Yeah.
But but it's one of those things that once you get past that,
once it clicks for you,
it will click.
Yeah, if you keep at it. If you actually play it. Because it's not like Heroes or something like that, where Heroes is complex from beginning to end. Champions, sorry.
It's the hero system. You're right.
Yeah, hero system.
Yeah, I own it, and I'm like, I bought those books. I read through them for about 2 hours.
Yeah.
My exact words after reading it were, well, fuck, I don't have enough breadcrumbs to get home.
Yeah. Because it's under the actual mechanics are rather elegant and simplified but you have to understand what they're actually saying and what the exceptions and the sort of core concepts are. And once you get that, though, it's easy. But the hero system is just you have a lot of work to do regardless.
And the thing is, and what I've noticed is you keep having a lot of work to do.
Yeah.
It doesn't get simpler even as you're playing the game. Right. There's still all kinds of numbers and shit you have to keep track of.
So, but Wild Talents, it does get simpler, especially once you get used to once you know what kind of dice you have to roll for your power,
and what each of the advantages and disadvantages do.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's really once you get it.
Yeah.
And I guarantee it might take you maybe a little bit longer than somebody else, but if you play it, you will get it.
Yeah.
You will.
And the great thing about Wild Talents one of the great things about it is, unlike Mutants and Masterminds, and we'll get more into the comparison a little later, I think, is they divide powers by sources and permissions. Mm-hmm. And so, the permissions, I think, is really genius, because what they mean in permissions in the system is that you say what kind of superpowers your character can have. And they divide it into, kind of slightly superhuman things, like a Batman character would have peak performer, he would be super, he would have great training and maybe some gadgets or whatever else, but he can't have cosmic radiation or whatever, but type powers. But you can get so you can, as a GM, could limit everybody. If you wanted to do, say, a Watchman / or Batman type game, you could say everyone has to be these kind of permissions only. And so you'd make the game a lot of the difficulty in running and playing this game. And we'll go into the difficulty of the challenges of running a superhero game with Greg, in the next segment. But come from dealing with superpowers, because superpowers can be fucking plot defeaters. One of the things that Greg was, if you're a mind reader, you can solve plots basically instantly, unless you have a mind reading nullifier. And after a while, that gets really fucking annoying. It's like in Star Trek: The Next Generation. Why can't Counselor Troy just read everyone's mind and find out what the fuck's going on? So what's the excuse this week? So that's kind of the thing, is you can cut that off at the pass by saying everyone's going to have these permissions and these permissions only. So anyway, that's one of the things about the system I really like, and that's
the thing I really like is you really truly can create the superhero you want. Period.
Yeah.
And Mutants and Masterminds, the thing is they have, that game has a whole list of powers.
Right.
And you have to pick one from the list.
Right.
And you can modify it a little bit, but really only system-wise.
Well, why don't we talk a little bit about Mutants and Masterminds for those who aren't familiar?
Yeah, it's basically, Mutants and Masterminds, it's a point-based version of the D20 system.
Yeah, OGO.
Yeah, and and it has a pretty extensive list of powers that you choose from, that you put ranks in. Like, depending on how many ranks, the more powerful it is, the more dice you roll, the more damage it does.
Well, it's not the more dice you roll; it's like the bigger the bonus is.
Because sometimes it's dice too.
Because I haven't played Mutants and Masterminds in a while, so like for me, like one roll engine, you roll a pool of d10s and look for matches. That's the essential mechanic.
And this one, it does stuff like basically all the powers do something that modifies you.
Right. Well, in Mutants and Masterminds, you roll a d20, add in modifiers.
Yeah, and basically compare it to another person's defense.
Right. Or a DC for like a static skill check. So so you roll a single die and add in modifiers versus rolling a pool and looking for matches. So if we're comparing, and I think I should say I love superhero games. Love them. One of my favorite times. And it used to be, my favorite game used to be Heroes Unlimited from Palladium. For years, that was my favorite game. Right.
Then, eventually the honeymoon ended, and I realized I didn't like Palladium. But then Mutants and Masterminds came along, and I started with the first edition, and I got hooked because I really loved it. And then second edition came along, fixed a lot of the problems I thought it had, and I thought, oh man, my favorite game again. I think by now, Wild Talent has now replaced it. It's just because as I said, you can truly create the character you want with the powers you want.
Right.
I mean, like using the example, say you want to shoot fire out of your mouth as a power for the sake of argument. Well, then in Mutants and Masterminds, it would be you would take blast and you would say it was fire, and that's it. Basically, it's a ranged attack that does damage, and you can say, well, I breathe fire through my mouth, but it has no meaning.
Right.
In Wild Talents, you can actually it attacks with range, and it does set things on fire because you take engulf and then burn.
Right.
And then you could say, and you could put like an if my mouth is closed or sealed and I can't open it, power is useless. You can really make it what you want to make it.
Right. There's an extra precision in it. In other words, you can, instead of Mutants and Masterminds, very vague. One thing also to bring up on the mechanics is also this sort of like this kind of is reflected in the core mechanics. And one of the things Greg brings up is that by looking for matches, you have two axes of success or failure. You have
height
and width. So you can measure success or failure on those two axes. But in D20 in Mutants Master, you have one axis. The number
rolled higher.
Yeah, well, the one number that you roll, the D20 result. So because again, it's not just comparative rolls, it's often just against a static DC.
And also it often does cause combat to be really static.
Right. So that's the kind of thing is Mutants and Masterminds is a very kind of like, this is sort of it, and there's no exceptions to it. Everything is covered within this. Where Mutants and Masterminds says, because again, it's kind of the core philosophy. It's like you have three categories of power sets: attacking, which is doing damage, defending.
Wild Talents has this.
Wild Talents, sorry, yeah. Wild Talents has attacking, defense, and then useful. Useful is anything that is not attack or defense, and that's period. And then you have like ways to measure what this power does in general terms, like by how many dice pool you can measure how fast or how much weight it can affect or what range it can affect and that kind of thing. But that's the central philosophy, is like design what you want instead of like picking from a list.
Yeah. And I mean, I'll say, and Wild Talent, it does have some sample powers in there, but they're pretty much put there, I think more for two reasons. Like one, if you don't want to create your best, if you just want to create a quick character, you can just grab some powers from that, or they're useful for a guide.
Yeah,
just as an example of what certain advantages and flaws do.
Right.
But you don't have to take them, or you can make a power that's very similar but your own, with your own little quirks. And that's what I really love. That's one of the things I really love about it is just you can really make the character you think of.
You can see this in the Heroes of New Arcadia because we have some really like unique characters in it. with very unusual powers. I mean, one of the examples they have in the Book of Wild Talents is you can create an ability called Suppress Nuclear Fusion, and then like get it to where like for 200 or 400 points, you can turn the sun off or on, and you're like. And then that's philosophy, because like in Mutants and Masterminds, you couldn't do that. You couldn't make a starting level character do that.
Yeah, there's one post on our forums, like a character that could become Godzilla.
Yeah, that is actually the post I made. I copied that from RPG.net, and he does that in 180 points. So, and it's like 9 hard dice of defense, 9 hard dice of growth, and like 9, 10, or like 18 attack levels on his nuclear death breath. Nuclear breath. And that's the kind of thing you can do with Wild Talents. So it's a very powerful system. You can engineer exactly what you want without having to go through all the math and ridiculousness.
And even a low-level character can be really unique.
Well, yeah. Like what... I know you designed some characters other than the ones we played in the game.
Yeah, I have a... like. Yeah, I have a character I played in a lot of our games that's a shapeshifter that can pretty much become any living creature, even ones he makes up. And it's I've made him in Mutants and Masterminds before, but it took a lot of points to do it.
Yeah,
I did it in Wild Talents for the I believe it's the standard 300 point.
Well, 250, I think. Well, I mean that's their generic level. But
I know it was 250.
Yeah,
I did him at 250 points, and he was still pretty formidable with other stuff left over. I mean, which means I didn't have all these powers and like 2 skills or anything.
Yeah.
I actually made him like I had 3 dice and all of his normal attributes. I had a good selection of skills, good basic willpower and base will.
Yeah,
I could do it. I actually did it, and I could get creative about the way I did it.
Nice.
But I still think that. But the best thing that I think that it has over Mutants and Masterminds is to me, the damage system.
Okay.
Which by extent the combat system as well.
Yeah.
Because once again,
why don't you explain the Mutants and Masterminds?
Mutants and Mastermind. It's basically D20.
D20. Yeah.
Yeah. So you have your the D20 plus you have an attack bonus. And various feats that can modify what you can do, but it all comes down to a D20 roll. That's all it comes down to. And maybe some feats allow you to pull off something special, like
right.
But at the end, it just comes down to that. It's still pretty static.
Right.
Wild Talents gives you a lot more leeway in what you want to do. Like you can actually target a particular limb or the head. You can choose to, only do knockout damage if you want.
Well, to elaborate on that, like in D20 combat, the basic thing is everyone rolls initiative, and then
the highest initiative
goes first. That person declares what they're going to do, roll for their action, and then you resolve that action, and then you go next in line. So I go, you go, I go, you go, basically. Now in Wild Talents, you have a very different. Again, this is part of the front-loaded learning curve where you have the opposite of that. Well, not quite the opposite, but everyone first declares their actions, and the person with the high senses declares last. So the lowest senses person declares first. And then the highest senses...
Which means he's the one that can actually adapt better to what's going on.
Right. So if you declare first, you say, I attack that guy. And then that guy says, well, I dodge. And then my buddy, and then all 4 of them attack you. Attack the one who went to declare first. The guy like, I want to dodge it. Well, you already declared. You're too slow to react to their actions. You should have thought better. And then everyone rolls. And here's the great part. Everyone rolls, and then the actions are resolved in the order of the highest wit. So the person who declared first still could act first if he's like, very dumb, or has very low senses, but he has a ridiculously fast, score. He could still like punch that guy before anyone else can hit him. It all depends on on the highest wit. So it creates this kind of unpredictable nature of the battle, and it makes it very strategic. You have to think about your action, because it's very common in Wild Talents fights for characters to waste their action, like, I dodge! And they're like, nobody attacks you that turn because you were dodging. You're just jumping out of the way. So they focus on the guy who was shooting at them. So, you know.
Or another thing I love is, as I said, combat's a lot less static. You can actually, put some style into what you want to do. Into your move. It's not just I attack him. I mean, okay. In using the D20, yes, you can, you can describe this whole scenario of what your maneuver is going to be.
Right.
But it really just once again comes down to a D20 roll.
Right.
In this one, you can actually take multiple actions for for in exchange for die penalties. Mm-hmm. So you can actually pull off that maneuver of attacking like two guys in this 2 or 3 guys in the same round.
You make call shots or grapples or maneuvers or do a fast shot. There are multiple maneuvers for each kind of thing. And you can also do multiple actions easily. So,
and once again, you have hit points.
Yeah.
And I know a lot of people are like, oh god, hit points. The D&D D&D has hit points.
Right.
And a lot of people don't like that because you took a hit, it doesn't mean anything.
Right.
But in this one, it has hit points, and it does matter what happens.
Yeah.
Because all of your hit locations have hit boxes.
Yeah.
And you can cripple somebody without killing them, or you can take a lot of damage and have your arm that has your super weapon built into it blown off of you.
Right.
Or both of your arms, as the case may be.
Right. Well, we don't want to spoil anything for the listeners out there.
But you can have your legs blown off and have to start crawling.
Right. So you have a number of hitboxes per, and they can be filled with knockout or non-lethal or lethal damage. And there are a variety of penalties. Of course, there are some characters that are basically goo and they only have one hit location.
That's the globular.
Yeah, globular. That's the advantage, and they have slightly different rules. But so again,
but the thing is, you can do it.
Right.
And also, there's a power called custom hit locations.
Right. So you can have
essentially that's how you
or
you can create like the weirdly shaped creature that
right. Or a horse or whatever. So.
Yeah. Actually, I saw someone actually made like an elder thing.
Yeah.
In Mutants and Masterminds, in Wild Talents.
I wouldn't be surprised. I know there's a one-roll engine horror game called Nemesis that has stats for elder things and Shoggoths. So I wouldn't be surprised at all if they converted it.
So Mutants and Masterminds, if you call it, the damage system works is that you do your attack and it does a certain amount of damage, and then the other person has to roll his toughness save against your damage. And if the damage roll is higher than his toughness save, he takes that much damage, and then like if he'd say taking a certain 5 damage gets you a bruise condition.
You failed the DC by 5.
Then you get like a bruise condition. If you fail by 10, you get like an injured condition, which adds but it just adds penalties to your further rolls.
Right.
Which is fine, but that's a lot of numbers to keep track because you can have several conditions at once. And that's just a lot more numbers you have to keep in your head.
Yeah, this is true. I found that games where there's a lot of status modifiers, status conditions often get bogged down in that. I know basically every edition of D&D gets bogged down in that. That's why the D&D computer games do so well. Baldur's Gate and Planescape Torment. When you can just load up with modifier. I know there's a second edition, but that just kind of shows you. If you load up with a bunch of buff spells, then that's easy for the computer to manage, but like not so fun. Like, oh well, I know we're going to kill the big bad guy. Well, I'm going to cast all these protective spells on all my buddies.
I think there's a moment in most D&D games that we all forget about, and that's the frenzy of spellcasting buffs.
Yeah, that's what
before
I mean.
a fight begins.
That's what I mean. Yeah, we're going to. Yeah, that's exactly what I'm talking about. And then you have to refigure out all your stats. Because
I've actually had that happen. I've had that last over an hour one time. Just all the. And not even the other prep work, like our strategy, was just the buff spells that all of our casters were casting.
Yeah, no, that like you should see in third edition, the height of third edition, there were these online arena games where characters made these mid-maxed monsters and they fucking killed each other. Like before the fight, I cast all these spells on myself and drink all these potions, and here are all my stats buffed.
I did a game. Actually, I did an online game with you.
Yeah.
And it was a group of villains trying to defend off against a horde of heroes, and all the heroes took leadership.
Yeah, so that got ridiculous. And I've read some of these arena reports. I cast Dispel Magic on them. All right, we're making Dispel checks against 15 spells. And like here's Mutants and Masterminds. Obviously, Mutants and Masterminds doesn't get as bad as that, but it does get I think that's kind of a flaw in the system. I think that's kind of a bad part of the system to have status conditions, especially when they're endemic. Now you can be negatively affected by things in Wild Talents, but you really don't have those kind of penalties. You know, well, I mean, you don't have those like condition after condition.
And-
Like you're either up or you're not. I mean, you can have pain penalties, but like that's like oh yeah, -2 on all your shit.
Yeah, I really think combat needs like hit locations because it does matter where you get hit.
Yeah. I think it does make it more dramatic, makes it more real.
Especially,
especially
if you see like a mass, especially like the stuff where they're attacking before, and you can still try to dodge it. And first they roll, and they're going to hit you unless you dodge, and then he rolls the damage, and you realize if I don't dodge this, my head is pulped. I'm dead. So suddenly shit gets a lot more real for like headshots and
right, exactly. So in fact, that's one of the things in the Heroes of New Arcadia is you realizing your character is killing everyone he punches. You know, your character's super strong, and you have hard dice in your ability.
Hard dice, which means that
all attacks,
all hard dice are automatic 10s, which are hit. It's automatic headshot.
Right. So you're just punching people's heads off. You're just fucking murdering them straight up. And
which came back to bite me.
Right. And that, it also was like, that's not very heroic. And that's kind of thing I want to talk about next, which is like, how well do you think the Wild Talents game gets the superhero genre right? Like, one thing I know maybe that some people in our campaign, I don't know if this is just my fear, is that, superhero comics have fights all the time, like every single issue. And we haven't had nearly as many fights in there, but partially because, like, partially because of me, because I don't want to run a fight every session, because that.
But it's also our group.
Yeah.
I think because we all kind of like the stuff. Like, I mean, I can't speak for everyone else, but I think a lot of them agree that to us, just a society that has to deal with superpowers, is fun to roleplay in.
Right.
Whether you're fighting or just going down to the diner. I mean, I love that kind of stuff where you could be living in the city of New Arcadia, see like a dragon fly overhead, and that's only going to mildly affect what your thoughts of the day. That you're like, oh hey, dragon. I still got to go get some lean cuisine, and
right.
I kind of like that.
Okay.
And so I mean, and just interacting with people when you have superpowers is so much more interesting. Like imagine like Kyrop, my bat character. Imagine him like actually having to go report some crime to the police. So you're gonna have like this 7.5 foot tall bat creature walk in. Like, I'd like to make a statement, please.
Right. And that's kind of like one of the big themes in the campaign. I know that comes up again and again and again, and that's certainly very interesting. But I mean, do you feel like that it's captured the genre? Do you feel like we're in just some?
I think you've captured the genre the way I like it. Okay. I mean, we have fights. We fight when we need to.
Yeah. And
there's always a reason for it. We don't go looking for fights.
Right.
Which I think is actually a more realistic super thing. The fights come to us. We don't go to them most of the time.
Yeah.
And most of the time, and I like it, most of the time we are just trying to get along. And I think like a lot of comic books do that. Especially, like some older Spider-Man. There's a lot of stuff, it's just him trying to, he might be have really awesome powers and be a hero, but he's still got to pay his rent, work his, work. He has a job he has to worry about.
Yeah. Do you feel like that it gets better than Mutants and Masterminds?
I really do.
Really?
Yeah, I really do. I mean, okay, a lot of that stuff it just comes down to role playing. The system has very little to do with it. But I think it still does it a little bit better because it seems there's less focus on fighting. Like, all the advantages and powers all seem to be, and the feats all seem to focus on attacking better or defending better. They all seem to be stuff like that.
Oh, combat related.
Yeah, combat related.
Yeah.
Wild Talents, it's not so much of that. I mean, you can use them for fighting, but it also gives you a lot of things to just do.
Well, I think the thing is, in Wild Talents, again, the useful powers, the third category, it's whatever is not attacking or defending. And that's literally what would you want for a superpower? What is that going to be? And because of that, there's no, like you said, there's no feats or anything like that in Wild Talents. So the character can be as combat oriented or as and still spin. And
one person, he has a very low level power of like true eidetic memory. And I love it was a Wild Talents game I had heard of, and that was like one of his like he just spent a very few points on this, but used it, and he was a court stenographer who didn't have a typewriter. He just sat there and if anyone was like Rick, could you play that back, and he just recites verbatim what the person said, and that's why he took it, and that's a huge part of his character. There's not a lot of those kind of powers in Mutants and Masterminds that does itself. I mean, there's some, obviously.
Right. I mean, there's a lot of characters, I think, like established comic book characters that wouldn't work, that you couldn't make in these kind of games. And certainly a lot of the more wacky, or not even wacky, but just sort of people that don't punch each other for a living, are some of the best characters. I don't know. Maybe that's just me though. So. But yeah, the court stenographer is a good example of that. So, but
and I know eidetic memory is a feat, but this one, but it was actually done as a power, as a useful power, which to me makes more sense. Like, it's not just eidetic memory; it's like computer hard drive, perfect recall. And it just I think it just worked better because someone says he says he has a photographic memory. Which I think is still a little bit different than complete and utter recall. Right. But actually, you can differentiate that. You can make those two different things in Wild Talents. You can have you can have after one of those advantages that not like a permission, but one of those kind of intrinsic things.
Oh yeah.
And just have eidetic memory be one, which means you just happen to have an eidetic memory, or you can make it a power.
Right.
You have that option.
Right. And you could tie it to different. You can attach things, extras to it, which define it in more specific ways. Specific flaws. Like you can only use it on Tuesdays, or you can always,
or it's like an if then.
Attached to exactly, or attached to a specific gadget or something like that. So, I think that definitely helps the cause or the game.
And I love that you actually start thinking about what powers would be interesting as well, not just like how can I inflict more damage. How can I not get hit by more damage?
Right. Especially when all you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. I guess that's kind of the same syndrome. If you have characters that do these kind of things, then that's all they're going to do is fight. If all their abilities are in fighting, then they'll fight because that's all they can do. Like I think it's like one of the comics I read is Invincible, and one of the characters, his girlfriend, Ruby Red or something, or not Ruby Red, but God, what is it? I can't think of her name. Anyways, her powers are kind of like Green Lantern-ish. She makes constructs, or she reassembles molecules into things, and she can kind of do whatever she wants with them. And so for a while she fights villains does this typical superhero things. But then she's like, screw this, I'm going to go off to Africa and just help people. And I'm going to build cities, and I'm going to be, doing this. And if her character was defined in Mutants and Masterminds, it sounds like she wouldn't be able to do that really well because her power is like, you punch things, you don't make things.
Actually, the create objects power, they pretty much say that it's, it is basically just like the Green Lantern power. You create objects that, that just do things. But it's mainly for attacking or defending.
Right. That's if all the rules are there to support. But in Wild Talents, you can say create useful objects that are permanent, that exist outside of your thing. So that power is ridiculously easy to define in Wild Talents as a useful power, not an attacking or not a defending power. So it's just it's there. Just deal with it. So
yeah, actually, a shapeshifter character. I actually just for Wild Talents, I designed part of the thing. The way I kind of designed him was that. His clothing and anything he was carrying didn't change with him, so if he turned into something much bigger, would rip right out of his clothing, which could get expensive. So I actually had to create object clothing, which it was a pretty low power, but I just as very specific. I could create nothing but a simple outfit, so I'm not arrested as soon as it's over.
Right. So there you go. You have that kind of level of specificity that you don't see in it, and it's a lot easier to manage than Hero. So if you have any question, of course, in our next segment, we will have. I'll be talking to Greg Stolze about the creation
from the creator's mouth.
Yeah, from the creator's mouth, how he created the game mechanics, some advice on running the games in specific situations, like running fights. We also talk about a few other things, including his fiction. Some of the work he's working on his Kickstarters. He's the one who came up with the ransom game model. Did you know that?
I did know that.
Yeah. So we owe him a lot. We will have all that on there next. And then, of course, we have shout-outs, letter, and anecdotes.
It'll be fun.
And hi, this is Ross Baden with Role Playing Public Radio. I'm with Greg Stolze,
Hello.
Designer for Wild Talents and many other fine games, and some others too, and fiction, and writer. So we'll be talking about his fiction, but primarily Wild Talents. So Greg, tell us the history of Wild Talents. I know it comes from Godlike, the World War II superhero RPG, but that's about all I know of its lineage.
Well, once upon a time, long ago, Dennis Detwiller had this idea that he wanted to do a gritty superhero game in World War II. And he talked to John Tynes. He's like, who would write good rules for this? And Tynes recommended me, which turned out working out well for everyone. So at that time, I was doing a lot of work for White Wolf on Hunter, the Reckoning. And I distinctly remember that the genesis of what became the One Roll engine sort of arose from my thoughts as I was writing rules for Storyteller, in which I was trying to figure out what's the mechanical difference between requiring more successes and just changing the target number. I think that one was the target number 7, right?
Right, this is the old World of Darkness.
Yeah, so sometimes it would be, this is really difficult, so the target number's 9. And then other times it would be, this is really difficult, you have to get 3 successes. And I'm like, well, which is harder? I don't want to do the math and figure that out. And it's possible that I asked one of the developers there, I'm like, well, is there some kind of difference between, in this, when it means this, you change the target number, and when it means that, you change the number of successes? But no, it seemed to be pretty much just however the rules designer was feeling that day, or what the line developer, had his preference for one or the other. And so that put the idea in my head that you could have different axes of success, and that if you got a whole bunch of successes, that could mean one thing, or if you got a really super high success, that could mean a different thing. And you can see how this evolved into the One Roll engine.
Yeah.
But all that was still in the back of my mind when Dennis came to me and said, want to design some rules for Godlike? And I said, sure. The other thing that I was really on about at that time was Button Men. Who designed that? Was that James Ernest? I think.
Sounds right.
Give me 1 second to look this up.
We'll have to. I'll cut this out in the podcast.
I got it right here in my hand because I was so impressed by Button Men that I wrote about it for. Yeah, it was James Ernest. I wrote about it for Hobby Games, the Top 100. And what I really liked about Button Men was the idea that a different size dice could mean more than just this is the biggest number you can get.
Mm-hmm.
And so I came up with this elaborate system where you would have a set number of dice you were allowed to roll.
Mm-hmm.
But if you chose to roll like all D10s, that would mean you were only attacking. But if you chose to roll all D6s, you were only defending. But you could split your roll and you could have some D10s for attack and some D6s for defense and, some D4s for movement. And so all this stuff was going on. And now, does this set of rules sound familiar to you at all?
Yeah, a little bit.
that turned into Meatbot Massacre after I had the first playtest of it and, sent the rules off to to Dennis. And he came back and he's like, this is a nightmare. This is terrible for the GM. He's, it's fun to be a player and have all this, if you're only controlling one character, yeah, sure. Deciding that, okay, out of my 5 open slots, I'm going to use 2 for movement and 2 for defense and 1 for attack. But if you're a GM, it's just a mess.
Yeah, because you'd have to do that for 5
like
characters
this.
or however many. Yeah.
So I, and I tried it myself, and I'm like, yeah, that's actually 100% fair. So I kind of stuck a pin through that and, started again. I'm like, okay, so I need something where it's a lot easier to just, roll a batch of dice and do it. And I'd also, at the same time, as I mentioned, been fooling around with dice pools. And I thought, well, wouldn't it be nifty if instead of having to remember a target number, which is changing all over the place, we just set it up so that you roll your dice pool, but when dice come up in clusters, that those are successes. If you get a pair, that's a success, or 3 of a kind, that's a better success. Or if you get a pair that's really high, that's a different kind of success. And that became the one roll engine. And at first, I really just had this idea and started messing around with it and was delighted to discover that it worked better than I was hoping it was. And that was, it really was not the product of a lot of conscious craft to come up with the central idea of the one roll engine. It was just, it was a little bit of a lucky fluke, actually. But that's where it came from. And so then we started messing about with it and seeing how can we unpack these 2 axes of meaning. And once you have a way to get 2 results out of every roll, then it becomes a lot easier to compact your actions down into a single roll, which is when we started thinking, well, maybe we can do all this with just 1 hit of the dice. And that's why we called it the one roll engine.
So much of this work was Yardi, and how much of it was Dennis? Did Dennis in Godlike focus just on the setting and the characters, and did you focus on the mechanics? Or
the division was pretty stark. The characters and setting were all Dennis. The mechanics were pretty much all. The core mechanics, I will say, were all me. Mm-hmm. The guys at Hawthorne Hobgoblin who were publishing it then were putting up stuff for, well, what about this special case? What about that special case? What about this particular power? How do we handle that? And Dennis had a lot of stuff that he wanted to specifically, address because, he had the ideas that, okay, well, I want people who make impossible gadgets and I want it to work just like this. And he, he's like, well, and I want there to be ways for even people with, totally crappy powers to mess with the people who have totally awesome powers. And that was the willpower duel.
Right, the kind of the Highlander thing where they can sense each other and then they can battle each other through their wills.
So even the guy whose, superpower is I can take anything that is blue and turn it purple, and that's all I can do, is still way better off than a typical soldier when he's up against the guy whose power is I can take anybody living and turn them dead.
Yeah.
Because the normal soldier with no superpowers is just like, oh, wait, I fall within his categories. Well, shoot. And the guy who, our turns blue to purple guy can fight the power off.
Right, and he has nothing better to spend his willpower on anyway. I mean,
exactly. He's probably got a lot of points left over because he bought such a bozo power.
There are a few things that come up when with the story. Actually, recently I was on the Drunk and the Ugly podcast, and they did answer their listener emails, questions about the game, and one of them was about game design. And this listener asked about what is the math, how much, mathematical work basically should I put in my game design? How much time should I spend doing this? And, from my understanding, from everything I've read and everything I've seen is that, there is a very low amount of work that the character or that designers do usually in RPGs. And your story about the World of Darkness kind of sort of solidified that. I mean,
there may be, World of Darkness rules designers who had a, deep-seated, set of carefully calculated plans that I just didn't see because I wasn't at, line developer level or what have you. But certainly from where I was at, it appeared to be a lot of, oh, well, just we'll get it right. We'll eyeball it. I do know that there are people who do a lot of math analysis and that is part of their process. But that's not a skill I have. If I did have it, I probably would do more of it. I've got this board game that I was kind of, poking with a sharpened stick to see how it would twitch. And as I was, working on it, I'm like, okay, clearly there needs to be a lot more of this type of piece and a lot fewer of this other type of piece, based on, the special abilities that the pieces had. And so in order to balance that, if I knew a bunch of math, I could probably calculate it out. But instead, what I'm going to wind up doing is just sloshing the numbers around until I get something that looks right, and then I'll play through that and see if it plays right. And this probably costs me a lot of time in the long run, because I can't, just do the math to get a better guideline. But on the other hand, you can get there just by testing it in play and seeing what works and what doesn't, because that's what's going to happen. That's what's going to ruin your game if it's broken, is people are going to break it in actual play. They're not going to break it by mathematically analyzing it.
Right. Yeah, I think that does seem to be, kind of the norm. We'll see how it works in the field. Essentially, I guess, instead of
the last rocket you sent up blew up, Greg.
Well, fortunately, RPG design is a little cheaper than building rockets. But another thing that you mentioned is Meatbot Massacre, and that's one. I think, isn't that the first ransom game model?
That was the first one I ransomed, yes. As far as I know, the first one anyone ransomed.
Right. I know this is a little divergent, but this is RPPR. Has had several ransoms now. In fact, I'm just about to release my first standalone RPG called Killsplosion, which was financed through an RPPR ransom model through Kickstarter.
Wait, you're just taking everything from public radio.
Yeah, exactly. I just need the tote bags. So
when will I get to speak with Melba Lara, please?
So could you talk a little bit about the process of the ransom game model for those?
Well, part of it was, I'm sure that listening to National Public Radio growing up, as my mom had it on in the car when she was driving me to all over the place, probably sank it into my unconscious that, oh, well, one way you can do things is to say to people, you like this thing I have, maybe you could pay for it so that you can have the thing. But mostly where it came from, at the time, I did not see a lot of magazines on, because normally, back when I was starting out, if I'd written Meatbot Massacre, I would have pitched it to Shadis Magazine and said, hey, look at this great thing. Or pitched it to The Familiar as, hey, look, you can stick this in the middle of your magazine and people will have a whole game. And they probably would have gone for it. But both of those kind of faded from the scene. And I'm like, wow, there's not really a home for this. I was thinking, it's not long enough and involved enough to have a big book printed up about it, and I don't want to make it complicated just to pad out the page count to make it worth doing. So what I was kind of stumbling across the idea of, well, I need a way to gauge demand. The other thing was that this was back when the idea of selling PDFs over the internet was still this new idea, and people were unsure of how much of a chunk piracy was going to tear out of them. And I didn't want to have my work, have one guy pay for my work and then give it away to 500 other people. So I thought, well, on one hand, piracy is a gigantic pain, and I don't want to have to deal with it, and I don't want to have to, construct a secure website. I don't know how to do that. I don't want to have to figure out how to accept credit cards. Oh, it sounds like work. And at the same time, there was this tiny voice in the back of my head saying, and nobody who hates your game is going to pirate it. The people who pirate your work are, ironically, the people who like your work. And I'm like, and I wish they were taking my money, my work, and giving it away to people who aren't giving me money. But on the same time, you don't want to alienate people, and you don't want to alienate people who like your stuff, even if you don't like what they're doing with your stuff. So it was a kind of a tightrope act to walk. And I thought, well, I suppose that if I could figure out some way to get paid before giving it away, then piracy no longer becomes a problem. Piracy is just distribution after that. If, I put it out as, an open work free for everyone, well, now the pirates are doing me a favor by giving it to everyone. And so I'd actually in college kind of experimented with, okay, well, I'll, put out this piece of fiction and say, if you really like this, send me $5. And I did not get a lot of people sending me $5 that way. And one guy even, sent an email saying, well, you've screwed yourself because you've given us the ending before we pay for it. And I'm like, well, okay. So the lesson here is that people are more willing to pay for something they don't have than pay for something they already have. And I suppose that makes a lot of sense. So adding all that together, I had this idea that, well, okay, I will ask people to pay for something that they don't have. And when I've gotten paid, then they can have it, and so can everyone else. And that way, I'll get the money. I won't have to worry about setting up a secure website or doing digital rights management or managing credit card payments or anything. And it worked. I was able to take this medium-sized project that otherwise I couldn't have released or gotten paid for, and I was able to release it and get paid for it. And I presume people are still downloading it today.
Oh, do you not keep server stats on it, or do you just?
I should, but that's again one of those things that's under. I don't do web pages very well.
I gotcha. And it's already, it would be interesting, but it's out in the wild. So
the guy who really pushed me to release Meatbot Massacre was Daniel Solis, who now has taken everything I had to teach him about ransoming games and done it much better than me. So the student has surpassed the master there. But yeah, he was just really super fired up about Meatbot Massacre and thought it sounded like a really fun game. He's like, you got to find a way to release this. I'm like, I don't know. It's one of those things. Like, you got to find a way to release this. And so I eventually did. So that was all. The innovation came because Daniel Solis was kicking me up the staircase.
And he recently did Happy Birthday Robot.
Happy Birthday Robot and Doe Pilgrims of the Flying Temple. And I'm trying to think. He's got a couple other things he's working on. If you follow follow him on Twitter, he's always got about 5 projects up in the air at once. So. Yeah.
We'll put a link to his website or his blog so you can take a look at it. He's got does he do the art, or does he for his work?
I think he does some of it. He does the layout, and he also contracts for some of his art. So he's got a real gift there in his visual sense. He's the guy who did the beautiful layouts and for Rain and the covers for all the supplements. So he's got the advantage that he can make stuff look really, really appealing.
That is a slight advantage. So with this little tangent, I think that kind of summarizes the origin. I mean, at first, of course, you used fundable.org, and then that company went away. Now you're on Kickstarter as well.
Yes.
Do you have any Kickstarters going on right now?
What?
Do you have any Kickstarters?
I do. Right now, I am finishing up on one called 7 and 7. And the deal with that, it's going to be done in about a week.
Okay.
And I released a novel called Switch Flipped. And following the perverse, it was like one part of my brain asked the other part of my brain, what's the stupidest project I could work on? And the other part of my brain said, well, that would be taking that novel you released that sold so-so and writing a sequel to it that only makes sense if you've read the book. So that you take your small market segment and just cut it down to everyone who wants who wants more.
Right.
And I became obsessed with doing that and wrote this 10,000 word novella that sort of builds on the characters in Switch Flipped. And so I put that up for ransom. And the reason I think it's been doing pretty well, it's actually cleared and then some.
Yeah.
Is that
it's
one
over
of the
$1,300 right now. So
that's correct, sir. And boy, would I love to hit 14. But I think a lot of the reason that it's doing so well is that one of the things you can get for pledging is a copy of Switch Flipped. So I'm hoping to bring more people in to, Switch Flipped fanhood,
right,
along with, the people who were already there. So
yeah.
I've got that going. Next, I'm probably going to do a $300 or $400 one for a short story called Falling. I don't know how closely you follow my Kickstarters, but I did a short story called Shrimp about 2 months ago.
I saw it. I didn't contribute. I haven't read it, but I did see it.
You should.
Yeah.
Well,
I saw the Kickstarter. I do follow your Kickstarters to see what you're up to. So.
Shrimp was something of a departure. I tell people it's a literary short story in that there are no cyborg vampires in it. It is a story that is entirely about people who live in the suburbs and go to a martial arts school. And it's based on my decades of living in the suburbs and going to a martial arts school. So it doesn't have, my hallmark weirdness and horrendous violence and kind of phantasmagorical fantasy horror stuff. It's just a story about ordinary folks. But that said, people have been very positive about it. And so I'm hoping to do a bunch of stories involving a bunch of people who are connected, who are very different people, but connected only by attending the same judo and jiu-jitsu school.
I see.
So the next one is another story in that.
Well, we'll put a link up to it on the next, whenever you get that out too. So,
cool.
So let's get down to the meat of the interview, which is, of course, Wild Talents.
Yeah, my throat's starting to get dry already.
Sorry, but Wild Talents is a sort of setting-free universal superhero game where you can design your own superpowers and characters. Characters are built using a point system. You spend points to raise your attributes, your skills, and gain superpowers. Now, we at RPPR, a lot of listeners have been following the campaign I've been running, the Heroes of New Arcadia, and we've been sort of creeping up in power. And I've found a lot of interesting, challenges running a superhero game that are unique to the genre that you don't necessarily see in a, D&D game, a mystery game, a sci-fi game. So overall, first off, why don't you just give your basic advice for anyone who's running Wild Talents? For somebody who's setting down, starting a game in Wild Talents, regardless of the setting, what advice would you like to impress upon them first?
Okay. Well, first off, I'd like to clarify that if you get the big, thick hardback Wild Talents book, it does come with a setting.
Oh, yeah, that's right. That's true.
The World Gone Mad, the expansion of Godlike, where, after World War II, things just get weirder and crazier.
It's it's not part of Godlike continuity, but it's thematically similar, right?
It's an extension. No, it comes straight out of Godlike continuity.
Okay.
So it's an extension.
Okay.
some of the godlike rules sort of fall away as people become more and more comfortable with being, wild talents and not just the sort of restricted talents of godlike. But okay, advice for running and playing wild talents. One is that, well, first off, Ken's stuff in wild talents about the 4-color axis of building your setting or of containing the expectations of your setting are very, very useful. If you tell your players that, it gives you sort of an agenda of stuff to get clear on. It's like, okay, this setting is going to be medium high black. So that's, its moral clarity is fairly high. This is not going to be a thing where, you have to choose between, to ally with the baby eating demon to save the world. There won't be, it's not going to be like Call of Cthulhu where you have to constantly grapple with, victory by atrocity. Or you can, reduce that very low and say, okay, no, yeah, you guys are going to have superpowers, but you're also going to be facing total conundrums of, okay, well, if the only way to save this population is by mind controlling them and basically taking away all their personal sovereignty and turning them into little clockwork oranges, is that the right thing to do? Or is it better to let them struggle through and die, but at least they'll die on their feet as human beings instead of surviving as your little brainwashed minions? So that would be a low black game. And other metrics are blue, which is sort of the wahoo-ness of it. He gives Wonder Woman's invisible plane as an example of something that's a high blue thing. Or, when you've got aliens and Atlanteans and super intelligent apes all running around in the same setting, that's high blue. If you've got only one miracle exception and everything else flows out of that, that's low blue.
Right. Like, I think the difference would be, like, say, the TV show Heroes was low blue because everything had one source and none of the characters wore costumes for the most part.
Right.
And then one and a high blue would be like the main Marvel or DC universe where there's
especially like Silver Age, I'd say that there was a lot of different plates spinning during the Silver Ages for those.
Fair enough.
So those will give you a chance to set some expectations even before any points get spent. Another suggestion I have, which some people may kind of look askance at, but this is how I've wound up doing it when I've run Wild Talents games, is I ask my players, okay, what powers do you want your characters to have? And I will min-max them for you. I, the GM, will set this up. And that way, the GM's characters and the players' characters are all built by the same person with the same understanding of the rules, with the same sort of tolerances and expectations. And that requires a fair amount of trust in your GM. But Wild Talents is a game where, in the pursuit of giving people the freedom to make the powers they want, a lot of trust is just necessary.
Period.
One of the examples in the book is, okay, we're going to talk you through how to build a guy whose power is I can turn off the sun. And that, and I'm trying to remember how much it costs.
It was pretty high. It was a few hundred
It's not cheap. Destroying the solar system of all life is not an inexpensive power to have, as it turns out. But certainly it's not, it's not off the table. And, there would always be, you always could run a game, which is, okay, Sun Quencher. How does Sun Quencher handle a bank robbery? Say, put that money back or I'll destroy all life on Earth. And it won't be on me, it'll be on you. I think most people would actually prefer the bank robbers in that scenario.
Yeah. Sounds like a sensible tax.
So another option is to do that. you can also restrict your players and say, if you're a GM and you're setting things up, it's perfectly kosher to say, all right, look, these powers are off the table. I'm not going to let you have mind reading because that will just let you resolve every plot I throw at you way too fast. It will be the Counselor Troy syndrome where at the beginning of every game, I'll have to establish a reason that the mind reader player can't just figure out what's going on. And then the mind reader player is going to feel cheated because, oh, well, why did I pay for all these mind reading powers if all it does is soak up points that the other side has to spend in order to counteract them? So rather than put up with that heartbreak, I think it's easier for a GM to just say, oh, please, no mind readers this time, okay?
That's actually your point about making powers, having the one person make powers. That was definitely a hurdle we had when I was running Heroes of New Arcadia. I let the players do it, and people had different levels of knowledge of the system. And especially like in the very first game, there was some, I said it was kind of like Marvel street level, Spider-Man esque, and then somebody had the power to basically cosmically alter the oxygen in the area to suffocate his foes, and to knock them out, and the other one threw air conditioners at normal human villains. So there were, and the other one summoned a giant fire demon to burn them. So there was a bit of systems in continuity.
This is why you have to check the math, and this is why the GM has to be skilled at the leadership element of saying, well, you might want to tone that down a bit.
Yeah, we got over it, but that first session in particular was pretty not very immersive, I guess we'd say. You can listen to the actual play. You could read the comments of the site. I mean, they're pretty ridiculous. But one thing that comes up frequent when I'm running games also is balancing like you mentioned with this, the mind reading thing, balancing conflicts for the characters, like running fight scenes between the heroes and the bad guys, or coming up with other non-threats. Now I've had some success with using threat, dice pools, like using a dice pool for fires. There's a building on fire, you have to spend you use your actions to reduce this dice pool down to 0 to put the fire out.
Right.
But
I think that was one of Ben Baugh's suggestions.
Yeah, I got the idea for monsters from Bigger Bads, and I've used it. I didn't know did that originate from Bigger Bads, or was that something from another One Roll Engine game?
I don't remember where it turned up first. I know that it was one of Ben's innovations, because I remember reading it and going, God damn it, why didn't I think of that?
Yeah, exactly. It's such a great idea. It should be. That's the great thing about the One Roll Engine games. It's like, oh, there's a great idea. Let's throw it in all of them, because it makes all of them better. So
well, and what I've found, and I can, if I had more mathematics understanding, I could explain why this is. But the rule set seems to take a punch pretty well, that you can throw these weird variations and it doesn't blow up. It will take quite a bit of home ruling without disintegrating under the pressure. So you may find, if you fool around with it at home, which, a lot of gamers do, if you house rule it,
mm-hmm.
It's not going to come apart at the seams and fall out of the sky flaming. And recently, I'm going to go off on a tangent I'll try to keep it brief. We got my 10-year-old son Monopoly for Christmas. And so we've been playing a ton of Monopoly, and I find myself appreciating it on a much deeper level than I, did when I was young, because I'm now looking at it as a game designer. I'm like, oh, that's quite clever. That's elegant. That's, you don't see how it's working on you, but it is. And then I read online about people are like, doesn't Monopoly take like 8 hours to play? Which is addressed in the current $10 Monopoly set rules, has this little, it's like a FAQ. And, one of the things in there is, if you find it's taking too long to play, that may be because you're doing it with with house rules, like the house rule that if you land on free parking, you get all the money that's been collected from taxes. That'll make that game last forever. And as soon as I read that, I'm like, oh, yeah, I can see exactly how that takes the limited resource, the cash that's coming in at the rate of $200 every time a player passes go, and, going out at a much higher rate generally as you spend money to buy properties. And now all that money that was leaving the system is stuck in the system. So, of course, the game can't reach an end because, it doesn't end until people run out of money. And if you constantly reintroduce the money to the system, it'll run forever. We should figure out a way to do that with the real economy.
Well,
I would suggest my house for the free parking space.
I'm sure you could get a petition started online. You might be able to get a good number of signatures for that. Certainly, it sounds better than some of the ideas I've heard that are out there. But going back to the balancing issue. Yes, because one thing that is sort of emblematic of the superhero genre, I think, is the sort of the rock paper scissors aspect of it. I have ice powers, I defeat Fireman, but this guy has earth powers and he defeats me, or whatever, or or Waterman defeats Fireman, and then Electrical Man defeats Waterman, and so on and so forth.
It's a fine line to walk, because people create these superheroes because they want their character to be really cool, as with every game. And you don't want to have your character negated. So if you are, if your concept is, I've got this, I'm the Human Torch, you don't want to be fighting the Submariner every week because, he'll just flee under the ocean and I can't go in there because it'll quench my flames and I'm boned. So my options are to either not be awesome or to, try and find some way around it. And a certain amount of finding some way around it is really fun. And, this is where you say, oh, truly, he's showing his true heroism because even though he's been poisoned by kryptonite, he's still doing the right thing without his superpowers. But that's only cool a certain number of times, and sometimes you want to let the Human Torch be the Human Torch and burn stuff.
Right.
So you need to have as the GM, that's the art of it, is to balance the challenge. You want it to be challenging enough that it's interesting without it being such a tailored straitjacket that the player feels that he's being picked on. That, of all the banks in the world, the guy whose powers exist solely to block mine robs the bank in my town. What are the odds of that? Or, the classic mind reading example.
Right.
Why is it that every supervillain my mind reader runs into is immune to mind reading?
Why don't you switch supervillains with the other hero in the other city so you can all fight be a little more effective.
And this is the argument for your play group is that the reason that these superheroes team up is that they have strengths and weaknesses, and they get together so that guy's strength covers my weakness.
Right.
And so, this does kind of make me want to set up some sort of categorization where you can set it up that, okay, this is my source, and we'll have niche protection, and it will be it'll be just like D&D.
So basically,
where there are character classes.
The GM has to custom tailor every single encounter to have some variety.
Well, it helps. You can do some general stuff that, this villain is just really strong and hard to hurt, and go.
Right.
And not everything has to be a cunning duel of wits where you have to figure out exactly what his weakness is, but you have to constantly change it up, and you have to constantly think about, what is, what are my players, what do they really like? What seem to really catch their interest? What's going to really challenge them? What's going to really frustrate them? Because, frustrating your players is good as long as they are eventually stop being frustrated.
Right.
Can't just constantly give them the win without denying it first. And I'm also fine with having things go disastrously for the players.
Right. Definitely. Have you found any sort of like rules of thumb in terms of balancing encounters? You know, like in Dungeons and Dragons, you have the challenge rating system, or you have the XP budget.
The whole thing is meant to be mathematically done for you, and Wild Talents does not have that capacity. I mean, it just I think it privileges variety way too much, and I think that's to be artificially balanced from the outside by a guy who's removed from you by the distance of a book. And I think that's probably a factor with superhero games in general, where there isn't niche protection, clearly defined in a limited number of player types. So you really do just have to accept some of the trappings of the genre, which is that nemeses always wind up fighting one another. Superman almost never fights the Joker because, hey, why would he?
Yeah.
He's got Juggernaut to deal with. And yet at the same time, Batman's on a level with Superman and the Joker's on a level with Batman. So it doesn't quite make sense. And yet somehow it still keeps going on.
Right.
So tips for keeping it balanced. You really just have to look at what your characters can do and what your players tend to choose, and base your decisions on that and springboard your ideas off that. One thing I will say is I think the most successful Wild Talents game I ever ran was a Progenitor campaign. And I came to it with no big plans. For your listeners who don't know, Progenitor is a Wild Talent setting that starts in 1968 when this Kansas farm wife is sort of involved in a never explained cosmic accident that makes her nigh omnipotent. She has a ton of cosmic power that she can change on the fly to do just about any physical effect she wants. And no idea what she's supposed to do with this until she sees footage of the Tet Offensive in Vietnam and thinks, well, I have to do something because really I can do anything. So she flies off to fight in Vietnam after showing her powers off to a number of politicians and military personnel. And it's only when she's been fighting there for a month or so that people clue into the fact that anyone who survives having her powers used on them develops powers of their own. So those military guys she showed powers to, now they have powers. The Viet Cong that she didn't instantly kill, they have powers. The people that are exposed to these other powers develop powers. And so it's like a viral contagion of cosmic energy. And it gets weaker with each succeeding generation, but also more numerous. So there's one at the top and 10 underneath her and 90 underneath them, and so on and so forth downward. So what I did for my campaign was I had the players come up with characters who were all dying of untreatable illnesses and who were in a psychological group together, group therapy. And so after and the first session was just them going through their lives as, the brain tumor is pressing on them, or as, their strength is wasting away, or as they're getting radiation treatment to try and slow the advance of whatever it is they had. And the players, went out and, of course, found the most gruesome, tragic diseases they could possibly be suffering through. And then at the end of the session, one of the people who'd been exposed to these energies had developed healing powers and feels that, it's her duty to heal others as she herself was healed. And so she looks up a treatment group for the terminally ill and goes and heals all of them. And in the process, they are now tier 4 progenitor characters, which gives them just tons and tons and tons of points to play with. I distinctly remember saying, okay, what do you want your character to be able to do? And he's like, oh, I want him to be super strong and super fast. Okay, what else? And also, like, be able to copy other people's powers. Okay, what else? And just, kept giving, yeah, okay, mind control, sure, invisibility, yeah. And just piling it on. And then I just said, okay, what are you guys going to do? It's 1968.
And just leave it. So it's a total sandbox campaign.
It was a total sandbox campaign, and it wound up with them murdering a insane superhero who thought he was Jesus Christ returned to Earth, nearly provoking Israel to, pushing Israel to the brink of war, being investigated by the federal government, just all kinds of great stuff. And before they understood that their powers were contagious, they picked up a pair of hitchhikers and, just used their powers to screw with them. And so then these two hitchhikers are developing superpowers. It goes on and on and on. So one of the things that I always wanted Progenitor to do was poke at the comic book trope of the villain who creates his nemesis or the hero who creates his archenemy. Mm-hmm. And Progenitor does that really well because, okay, I messed with this hitchhiker. Now the fact that he can talk people to death, literally, is on me. And do I go and take him out, even though he's just mostly a regular guy who, he was actually hitchhiking down south to be a freedom rider, but he's now the world's deadliest freedom rider? What do I do with this? So that was how I dealt with the question of finding appropriate challenges for superheroes. A lot of what I did was not so much a question of can you do it, but are you willing to do it? Is it worth doing it? So I guess you would say it was a fairly low black game. A lot of what was going on.
Moral dilemmas.
Yeah, moral dilemmas. Okay. Are you going to win through atrocity? Is that if you're willing to give up anything to win, have you really won? And so, just a ton of fun. For me anyway.
Well, it sounds like the player. I mean, I would have had fun in a game like that. And that seems to be that's actually very remnant. Like the Here's a New Arcadia. There's a lot of I like throwing in moral dilemmas to my players, and of course they just love that. Especially like, do you team up with a supervillain? To save the world.
I did try to maneuver them into the classic scene where one of them initially thinks the other is a supervillain and they fight, but they just wouldn't do it.
I gotcha. Yeah. I know. Actually, in Here's a New Arcadia, the first sort of tier of the campaign, the street level thing, they find the supervillain who's a flawed clone of another supervillain, and telepathic super scientist type, and they've beaten up all her minions and foiled all of her plans, and so she sends them a message basically like, just give me time to pull out of the city and I'll never bother you again. I won't do anything else. I won't harm you. I won't harm your city. I give up. And they're like, no, she's a supervillain. Let's track her down and take her down. Let's go to her base and stop her for once and for all. And
clearly we have the upper hand.
Yeah. Well, they did get a lot of NPC allies to help. Like, hey, there's that supervillain she was cloned from, genetically engineered all these gang members into being killers, and now they're on the loose and they're just sort of wandering around and they hate her. So let's recruit them and let's get these other people to help them, help us out. And that actually comes with my next question, because I had this massive 2-session fight where I counted up there were 17 combatants in it. 11 on the side of the players versus 6 supervillains, and like all but 2 of the supervillains and like 11 characters died in that battle. Like wow. It was a ridiculously lethal battle. People were just dying, and it took 2 sessions to run. It took 5 hours to process just because of everything that was going on. Because right. I had to write down everyone's action and what they got for their sets to figure out whose set would go off first. So this is a very like crossover big brawl thing. Do you have any sort of like
problem to have? Yeah.
What do you do for like running fight scenes for like because I found like running one supervillain, no matter how powerful, it tends to get splatted because the players can wear down all his sets through doing 1 point of damage, takes off one off all your sets, and you can only roll up to 10 dice, so you can only get so many sets, period. And unless I just make him totally invulnerable to everything. Which is no fun, it's frustrating. So how do you run fight scenes with, say, more than 2 players, like 3 or more players? I mean, or, there's multiple combatants, like 6 characters in a fight, PC and NPC or something like that. So.
Yeah, I get you. One thing, it sounds like you had a bunch of GMCs on both sides. And that's a little bit of, if the GM was running all the players' allies as well as all the players.
I think I had I gave the sheets of their allies to the players to help.
Okay.
So that mitigated it somewhat. But in general, I try to, like, lately I've been avoiding fight scenes in general, because even if it's a standard fight, 4 PCs, then I tend to, have at least 2 or more bad guys to fight them, so that it's a interesting fight, because again, the one NPC gets splatted by 5 characters.
Right. Well, one thing I've done is to pre-roll a bunch of stuff.
Yeah.
And just have, instead of physically manipulating the dice, I'll just have, okay, here's the numbers this guy got, and okay, he's rolling 8 dice in his pool. What are the next 8 numbers? Okay, there's my sets. And I'll, jot those down for him, which doesn't sound like such a wonderful innovation, but it is a little bit of a time saver. And when you're going through round after round after round after round, that's when you want to have your time saved. If I've got GMCs on both sides, I tend to not roll for it. I will be able to position that, okay, so your 5 allies are fighting this one high-powered bad guy, and okay, they're just off on the side struggling. One of them's going to pop out of this as the winner in about 2 or 3 rounds, but until that time, don't even worry about it. What are you guys doing? So I do tend to hand wave anything where the PCs aren't hurting someone or getting hurt in combats, or where the PCs aren't involved directly.
Right.
So that'll speed things up. I'm trying to think what else. You can save a lot of time by giving your bad guys hard die powers. And, now it's just going to be, okay, well, I know he's got 4 10s for whatever he chooses to do, and don't have to roll that. That's a little bit of a shorthand. Or you can give him, wiggle dice, and it's the same thing where, okay, yeah, what's he going to do with his 4 10s this turn? Let's see, what else will speed things up? If generally trying to keep, all right, I'm going to back up a notch and say that Wild Talents lets you get very, very complicated and very, very detailed, and you can custom tailor your powers a lot so that they work really well in this situation and are paid for by not working as well in another situation, and you can get very, very finicky with it. But I've always tried very hard to keep it so that it works just as well if you are not finicky. And so you can keep it simple. You can play the guy who is just strong and tough, and he's not at a huge disadvantage against someone who has this bizarre off-the-wall innovative, custom-tailored ability that fits his particular backstory and situation really, really well. If you see the difference, I've tried to make it so that you can be really complicated if you want, but that you don't have to make it really complicated in order to be effective. A lot of games seem to reward min-maxing, frankly, by making the characters more powerful. And the reason you put points on it at all is because you want it, you want to have less of that, or you want to have that have a cost. And a lot of people will instinctively lash out at the idea of optimizing a character, which I find myself thinking, I think it's just great that they care that much about the game. I think it's terrific that they're interested. I think I look at a min-maxer and I'm like, yes, that is a person who wants to engage the rules. Yay. And if he gets a minor advantage out of his investment of time, effort, and expertise, well, so be it. But at the same time, you can't let it be so overwhelming, unbalancing, and distorting that the rest of the game falls apart in comparison. So I've tried to make it so that if you just take the pre-generated powers that are written up in the books, that's fine. And that's the easy way. You can throw together a Wild Talents character quite quickly just by saying, okay, I'm going to take some invisibility, and these are my stats and skills, and let's go. And he's functional. And another guy who takes the same amount of points and obsesses over it at home for a couple hours, gets a character you can play as well. And should one character be completely outclassed by the other? I don't think so. All right, now I spoke for quite a while there. Did I address your question of how to make fights go faster?
I think that covers a lot. A lot of it. I mean, I'd wondered if there was any other particular like, again, the 4-on-4 fight, that the kind of basic stuff. I mean, the pre-rolling certainly addresses a lot of that, and trying to have NPCs negate each other, sort of, these NPCs fight these NPCs and just remove them from the equation. But I just wondered if you had any personal tricks for, again, making it more like D&D, I guess, in terms of, because, D&D, for all its flaws, like, you put a dragon down, you know what to expect from the characters. Yes. In a lot of ways. But again, it's a superhero game, so it's apples and
You're
oranges.
Always going to have the weirdness. Yes. Yeah. Well, and another part of it is, and this deals less with the rules and more with the tropes, is that it's a pretty stupid guy who fights to the death when he has an option.
Right.
And that, a lot of times I've had, the villain is like, clearly I'm getting licked. I quit. I'm running away.
Yeah. In my experience, that I've tried to have villains run away, but the players, they don't let them if they can. I mean, or the fights end so early. That actually brings up my next point, which is dealing with hard dice and attack powers, because one of the things that was sort of jarring for one of my players was that he had a super strong character, a kind of man-bat sort of thing, and he was the one throwing air conditioning units around and was also punching people, and he had hard dice in body, hyper body. Yep. And so he was just straight up murdering people, like with just punching them with enough force to, go through an engine block. So he was like, oh, wow, I didn't realize that. So
there's sort of, you don't see in the comics where the Hulk comes out and he's got blood up to his waist. Yeah. Because he's been wading through mere mortals. But when you think about the kind of forces that would be in play with that degree of strength is described, it would be like, how many fatalities were there in that earthquake? How many fatalities were there in that Hulk versus Thor fight?
Right.
You can't throw people through buildings without having this happen.
But it also one thing that I've house ruled in the game. I've seen it on the Cult of War, the One Roll Engine Google group or list. I got the idea from somewhere. was that in this last tier of the campaign is that I've banned attack powers, including hyperbody, from having hard dice, because it seemed to me that just because you're super strong doesn't mean you are always going to connect like with the attack roll. So if you wanted to do more, the idea that punch is always going to hit, outside of a ridiculous dodge or a hard dice defense, it got to be where thematically it just wasn't interesting, and it also made fights kind of uninteresting because the players weren't rolling. There was no variability in it,
Right.
or a ranged attack power with hard dice abilities.
Hard dice may work better for NPCs and defense from a thematic standpoint. You don't want to have to roll for your invulnerability all the time,
right?
But well, and Parta, some systems address this with just the idea of being player facing, right? Have you? And it's just, oh no, dice are for players. Other people, the GM doesn't roll any dice, and I'm actually fooling around with a set of mechanics like that for Horizon, where the GM rolls nothing. But that's still in progress. That's right. I think Trail of Cthulhu does it that way.
Trail of the Gumshoe system, you spend points for investigative abilities to gain bonuses, and then you roll for non-investigative abilities like athletics or fighting, and then you spend points from those pools to gain bonuses on your roll. So there is still rolling a Trail of Cthulhu, but it's for non-invest. You don't roll to spot the clue. You roll to run away from the monster, so you don't.
Right.
So.
And someone was talking about how they figured out how to do player-facing D&D. And then it's like, it's really not that hard to, instead of the player rolls against the bad guy's armor class, and then the bad guy rolls against the player's armor class, you have the player rolls against the bad guy's armor class, and then the player rolls a dodge against the bad guy's static defense. And, that this makes it much easier for the DM, who now doesn't have dice all over the place messing his stuff up.
Right.
The way to to steer Wild Talents in that direction is to have hard dice, on the GM side of the screen. The other way around it, is pretty much going to be hard dice on the defense. Is the way you get around hard dice on the attack, or so much go first that the enemy just never is within range of the Hulk's deadly fists.
Right.
The other one, is I'm trying to remember how the flaw works. It's Brute Frail, where no, it's escaped me. I'd have to look it up.
Okay.
But is one that is, the I think the way it works is that the super strong guy always goes last. And so if you haven't gotten away from him by then or dodged him,
you're screwed.
You're screwed. But I
had that chance,
with that one.
One thing, as I mentioned, we're the Here's an Arcadia campaign. I've been sort of raising the point levels for the characters as they progress onward. And right now I'm doing sort of a cosmic tier where they're all 500 point, world. They're the Authority or the Avengers basically.
Yeah.
And they're going around solving global, problems. And because right now the world is on the verge of civil war, like in the setting, the world is on the verge of war between the parts of society that want to embrace superhumans and metahuman powers and aliens, and you become a transhumanist superhuman based society. Like the basic incongruity in the Marvel universe is that they have flying cars, but only the Fantastic Four get them. Why don't they build a factory and give everybody a flying car? Why doesn't it become a science fiction setting? And so that's
a jerk.
Yeah, well, he is a jerk, but he's still a capitalist. I would assume, he is. But then on the other, so there's that side that wants to change everything and become this super powered utopia basically. And then the other side is the status quo, where we're going to lock everything down and keep the thing the way normal humans are still going to be in charge forever. And so
Step one, Unring the bell. Step 2, put the juice back in the orange.
Exactly, and that's they'll still have superhuman powers, but just in their military and police, so they obviously more of a totalitarian thing, and so that's how the campaigns
out.
Yeah, exactly. So the players are the ones that can sort of guide. They're deciding how this is going to shake down. Whether the world's just going to have a cold war, whether they're going to somehow merge, or if there's going to be a big bloody conflict. And so I'm finding at 500 points, there's a lot of things that are different about it. For example, I can't really have characters make basic rolls anymore. Like roll science, I have 5 hard dice in mine, so I know everything. I have I got 6 10. I rolled 5 and I have 5 hard dice, so I got 6 10. So what can you tell me? Like, oh, okay. Well, you know everything about this topic. So. Yeah. Have you had much experience running games at this level? And
well, that was the aforementioned Progenitor game was close to that. I mean, we had this physically perfect power cloner. Mm-hmm. We had a super genius who was unbelievably persuasive, and we had a telepath who could also turn invisible. So high grade telepath who could also turn invisible. So they were, incredibly influential. If they could get exposed to someone who was just a normal person, they could eventually talk him around to their point of view. And so part of it was, people who have been persuaded to believe things that they normally wouldn't, that's not good for them at all. So, every time you use this on someone, you realize you're gambling not with your sanity, but theirs. But yeah, you really just have to, accept that you have to accept the power of the players. You're the one who gave them 500 points. This can't be any big surprise to you. There's only so much hyper strength you can buy.
Right.
So, you can put people on the other side. You can play the, Superman game of, okay, yeah, you can deal with any situation if you're there, but you can't be everywhere at once. But by and large, yeah, I mean, it's I'm remembering the Epic D&D book which I don't have, but I remember flipping through it once, and it's like, okay, yes, here is what epic spells look like. You just okay, everyone under 3rd level within 100 miles turns into a frog.
Right. Or I've created a new species, or a new dimension.
Yep.
Or I have taken someone and nailed them to the sky, which puts them in orbit around the planet, inflicting damage forever. And I think it keeps them alive somehow. It's just the ultimate screw you spell to a bad guy. And if I make a DC 100 check, I can balance and walk on a cloud. And
so you have to be ready for your characters to do this. Right. And so again, did you put any restrictions on what they could spend their 500 points on?
Well, they're basically upgrading their existing characters. So I already knew, these were the same, like the Man Bat. He now is talking to a Mayan bat god, and that's how he has, he's upgraded his powers. And the guy in the robot suit got a really awesome robot suit now, and the guy who's been experimenting on himself. Actually, he went from being a guy who tried to merge magic and technology to go into a robot suit, and then accidentally killed himself. So he's haunting a robot, cloned himself a body. And now he's kind of like a Plastic Man kind of super scientist, and so he's had the most change. But and then one character who died in one character had a dramatic transformation. Actually, didn't die. So you get the idea. And for the listeners out there, I'm sorry I'm spoiling bits about it, but we talk about this on the forums anyway. So
right.
But I have a sense of their powers, but. Just again, like if there were any like mechanical or tricks or anything for 500-point characters that wouldn't necessarily work at 250 points.
I think that's beyond the point of mechanics and tricks, is that, you are at the point where you've basically given them the keys and said, okay, now you're in the driver's seat, and where are you going to take this? Yeah. So you just have to be willing to, extend their actions farther than they wanted them to go, and to have, the natural consequences of individuals with the power of the Warsaw Pact stumbling across, your world. And part of this is that I tend to set things up without any clean, easy, perfect resolution.
Right.
I tend to visualize when I'm setting up an adventure. I'm like, okay, so if they do this, then the bad fallout is going to be A, B, and C. And if they do this other thing, then the bad fallout is going to be X, Y, and Z.
Right.
And I am generally fairly straightforward. I'm like, oh, well, if you do that, you might get A and D, or maybe something else. Who knows? And generally, my players surprise me quite a bit with their ability to either come up with a third option that I didn't foresee, but usually I can take whatever my bad fallouts were and pick a little from each that makes sense, or else they, do a really good job of mitigating the blowback. And so that becomes, the challenge is not, do I get what I want? The challenge becomes, do I get what I want at a price that I'm willing to pay?
Right.
So
there is one thing I have found, obviously the moral consequences, and that's been a campaign theme from the beginning. But there is one other thing I found, like in between each tier of the campaign, each sort of major thematic section, I've had another person run one shots of it, and we call this the giant size or the annual, and keeping on with the comic book theme. And in the latest one, where we got to test, and I have my own player character for these sections since I get to play for once. They all had 500-point characters. We all had 500-point characters, and the GM had an ingenious solution, which was we had to go to this magical realm, basically, that in order to solve this major crisis to save millions of people from death and from being destroyed, we had to go through this realm. But the magical realm had very unique properties in that it had this sort of reciprocal defense system where anytime you used an ability, like it would gain the characters around you, the people, the natives of that realm would suddenly take on characteristics of that thing. So if you have electricity powers, the first time they'd gain a slight bonus to their stats, and then if you use it like 3 times on the same set of people, they would gain electricity powers. So it was essentially like the GM was very upfront. He's like, it's like Skyrim. Everyone levels up with you. So like a video game. So like you can't just go around beating up level 1 peasants, because eventually there'll be level 50 peasants with immunity to being beaten. So or they'll be as good
as. The solution is that if you strike someone in this realm, you must kill them immediately.
Right, exactly. And
oh, good traveler, I faced him with my eye beams.
But the people around him, like the butterflies and the rabbits and the wolves, would also gain laser powers. So like even not the ones you're directly interacting with. So we were afraid to use our own superpowers. Like my character could teleport, but we couldn't just
butterflies on myself.
Yeah, exactly. So you can only do that so many times, but it's kind of like another comic tradition where the characters are thrown into some new setting or world or area where their powers don't work the same way, or there's some risk to using them, like the Mojo universe and Marvel, or Mitzelplix, or the little imp in DC, changing everything up on everybody, and that kind of thing. So that's obviously I can't do that every single session. Here's why your powers are total. It'd be like the mind reader thing, only for the entire group. Here's why none of your powers work this entire session. But
again, every now and then, yeah. I mean, one of the canonical events in Progenitor is that there is a giant battle I think it's in 1998 or 1999, where she actually gets knocked into a coma, and while she's in the coma, everyone else's superpowers conk out, which, the world starts to, to erode, that there were governments that only maintained order by virtue of having super geniuses at the helm. And once they're just ordinary folks, those political systems start falling down. And I would love to run a game sometime where I could blindside the players with that, where it's, like, okay, yeah, all this craziness is going on, but you've got superpowers, and that's, and now it's the twilight of the superpowers. They're all shut off. You're just your regular old selves again, but so are all the bad guys you've been fighting all this time.
Everyone, so it becomes Call of Cthulhu, basically.
Yes.
Let's get our shotguns and dynamite and kill the cultists, basically.
Yep. And then the powers come back.
And then the powers
when she wakes up again.
So before we end this interview, we also want to talk to you about your fiction. I know recently you wrote a novel, Mask of the Other, which is the Cthulhu mythos and, horror and set in Iraq.
It starts out in Iraq.
It starts out in Iraq. What do you want to talk about? What of your works? We've already talked about the ransom, the Kickstarter stuff.
Yes. And there's be sure to put up the link to my fiction library on gregstolze.com, because that's where all these ransomed out pieces wind up. They're archived there, and you can get them and put them on your e-reader for free.
Right.
My theory being that once you are exposed to my work, you will become addicted and crave ever more.
The first hit's always free. Is that it?
That's the theory. So what this just recently, or I guess over the last year or so, I've had the good fortune to be invited to contribute to a number of fiction anthologies, which, I remember back when I, first started out gaming long, long ago, there was a lot of emphasis on ancillary fiction, and, White Wolf was putting out all these novels, and the Dragonlance novels were big. And then that sort of fell aside, and now it seems to be coming back a little bit. Or it may just be that game companies are flirting with fiction again in an attempt to, broaden their portfolios. I don't really know. But I got approached for a couple, I believe it's Stone Skin Press has, they put out one book called The New Hero.
Mm-hmm.
You seen that one? And I got in volume 2 of that. And the great thing, what I've liked about these so far, the first anthology had the cover, which was by Jean Ha, looks like an ancient Greek amphora, one of the illustrated vases.
Yeah.
But all the figures on it in Greek style are characters from the stories. And so for New Hero 2, the volume I'm in, it's going to be done after the fashion of a Japanese woodcut. And so I got to see a preview of that art, and it was fabulous. My character with, her Cadillac is a little bit incongruous, but so that's in, Cadillac Ann is in the New Hero 2. The same company is putting out a book of fables, Aesop-style fables. The last I heard about it, it was tentatively titled Aesop 2.0, and I wrote a story called The Coyote and the High Density Feedlot for that. Which sadly I can't say much about it because it's fables are so short, Aesop stories are they've got to be super tight. So by the time I got finished describing it, I would have exceeded it in word count and spoiled everything. I'm looking forward to that one coming out just to see what everyone else has in there. It reminded me a little bit of that David Sedaris book that came out a couple of years ago, I think. What was the one?
Sedaris Fables?
Yeah.
What?
I've got it in another book.
Squirrel Seeks Chipmunk?
Squirrel Seeks Chipmunk is the one. So.
Yeah.
So this is a little bit like that.
I got you.
Although having read Squirrel Seeks Chipmunk, man, that goes into some shockingly dark places if you're not kind of braced for it. So there's the Don't Read This Book is coming from the guys from Evil Hat, and it's short stories based around Don't Rest Your Head. And I contributed one called Don't Harsh Your Buzz, which is about the perils of self-medicating with caffeine in Mad City.
Yeah, that sounds a little dangerous. We've actually played several sessions of Don't Rest Your Head for the actual play, and yeah, after reading the book and the Don't Lose Your Mind, the supplement for it, that doesn't. Of course, pretty much everything in the Mad City is a little dangerous. I mean, there's not really a safe.
Well, that's the point. I got to be a player in a game of Don't Rest Your Head that was just a ton of fun because I went into it with no idea what was going on, and the characters were all siblings, and so I still just remember the scene where my sister and I have had the idea that we'll get back to the normal world by getting arrested. The police will have to take us. And so we're sitting handcuffed in the back of this police car. And I just turned to her and I'm like, this is the best idea we've ever had. She turns back. You're right, brother. You're so right.
Exactly. Actually, I do want to think the idea of publishers getting back into fiction might be because of the ebook trend and being able to sell ebooks of fiction for very cheap. I know the Eclipse Phase people are selling ebook shorts of stories set in the Eclipse Phase universe as a side project or as to help promote.
I bet that's exactly it. That the barriers to entry have dropped so heavily, and that you can instead of having to print 10,000 copies and sell half of them to get your nut back, you can now just pay the authors and pay the layout guy and have it available indefinitely without having to do necessarily a lot of hardback printing. I bet that explains it all. I'm shocked I hadn't seen that before. I mean, because I've been doing more fiction for that exact reason, that it's much more economically feasible.
And ebook fiction is a lot easier to do than ebook RPGs because PDFs are problematic on most ebook readers, and the layout of most RPGs make it very hard to convert to a straight Kindle or EPUB format. This speaking from my own experiences of trying to convert Zombies of the World.
It's not any easier on a Nook Touch.
Yeah, exactly. So all right, well, if that now that everyone has. Hopefully that answers all the listeners' questions about Wild Talents, your fiction, and the ransom model, and everything else. Any final words?
Nope. Just thanks for having me on again, and be seeing you at Gen Con for probably another one of Scott's World War II games, right?
World War One. Yeah, I'm hoping
World War One this time.
Yeah. Well, the first one last.
Wait. The sub one was World War One, and the plane one was World War One.
Right.
The
Dig to Victory, the trenches was. I mean, they're all World War One.
Okay. Why am I thinking World War II? Because we were talking about Godlike, probably.
Yeah, that's probably it. All right. Well, hopefully there will be another one. Scott, if you're listening.
It's on you, man.
Yeah. One last thing. I actually played in a Call of Cthulhu game recently that was set in 1940. We were Nazi saboteurs in America sent to assassinate certain people, and we get caught up in, our contact is a member of the Marsh family that escaped the Innsmouth raid in 1928. So, you can see how this is going. But at one point we'll ask, okay, what do you want your fake name to be for this fake, driver's license and everything? I'll Scott Glancy, of course, all American citizen. So, my Nazi occultist historian / sorcerer is
my name's Scott Glancy.
Yeah, I think he'll like that.
Well, one of the other anthologies that's on the pot is for World War Cthulhu. And I got a story in that called Strange Bedfellows, which is all about the British anticipating the German invasion of England. So the research on that was pretty interesting. That everyone expected that the Nazis were going to be swarming over the channel any minute now, and then you read and they're like, no, there's no conceivable. That would have been a really dumb move. They didn't really have the transports to do that, and most of what they had, a British destroyer could take out by going past it and swamping it with its wake. So
nice.
Yeah, it was interesting research, and I hope I wrote a good story.
Good. Well, I'll have to check it out. All right. Well, next up we'll have shout outs. We'll have the main episode and shout outs, letters, talking with Tom, and more. So we'll see you guys next time.
All right.
In the interest of full disclosure, Mass Effect 3 has been dominating all of my free time. Now, while I will not be giving a shout out to it, as unless you are a hermit living in a cave, you know about this game, I will just say that it has latched onto my brain like a deer tick on a fawn. However, while I will not write a letter about something like Mass Effect, it did get me thinking back to about 20 years. Back to a game from the early 1990s, one that I was as into and was as groundbreaking to me as Mass Effect is now. I am referring to SimCity. Allow me to clarify. I am not talking about the old Commodore 64 version. I never played that. I am talking about the Super NES version. Yes, the one with the dwarf with green hair, the Mario imagery all over the place, and one of the sweetest cheat codes in Super NES history. You remember the code, right? First you get your money low enough so that your end-of-the-year expenses will give you negative money. Then, when the year ends and you go to the tax screen, lower all of your expenses so that your next year's budget equals 0. Then hold down the L button, then exit the screen. When the game goes back to the city screen, immediately go back to the tax screen. While there, raise all of your budget back up to full so your new cash total is once again negative. Then exit the tax screen and then release the L button. You have max money. Ah, memories. I spent countless hours playing this game, and like many players long before I started building cities, I spent a long time razing them to the ground. And the fact that the game provides you with 7 pre-built cities to destroy, you can avoid building anything for a long time. You had Bern, Tokyo, Boston, Rio, San Francisco, Detroit, and Las Vegas to doom to destruction. There was also the Freedom Land map with no water and forests in the shape of Mario's head, but you had nothing to destroy. No thank you. To give you some idea of how much I loved this game, let me tell you about this. The primary goal of the game is to make your city into a megalopolis of 500,000 people. It took me a long time to reach that goal. In fact, I can remember the day I first made it to that level. It was on a January 15th. It was a Sunday, and the year was 2012. That's right, I still play a Super NES game even to this day. That's how much that game meant to me and still does. It is also a very good example of what happens when the average person is given total power over the lives of a population of virtual beings. It always tends to be less about love and compassion and more about target practice. I kept hitting the green footprint button to the disaster menu and dropping an epic level of death and destruction on the helpless citizens of my doomed metropolis. That's why I always found the gods of the polytheistic religions the most interesting. These gods always tended to have more human-like qualities, and were always barely contained in sanity. They crashed in among their mortal followers, fucking, smiting, and destroying everything in sight. So the point of this letter? It's this. SimCity turns you into a crazy Norse god, so go get a copy at once.
You can't do this. You can't cut back funding. You will regret this.
Now, unfortunately, that's the more advanced SimCities.
SimCity 2000.
I know.
So
I still love. I love that game.
Ooh,
Yeah.
So tell me, like, that's one thing. I mean, I would always blow stuff up too, or whatever. But I'd kind of quit the game after, like, all right, I've seen that, I'm done. Did you actually rebuild cities after you?
Actually, eventually, it was about 3 months of owning that game, of just me just smashing cities left and right.
Yeah.
I finally started to build them.
No, I mean rebuild. Like after you drop.
Oh yeah, actually, I have done that, especially when I learned that code.
Yeah.
I would, there was one time I would go to the biggest map possible, which is, by the way, map number 62 on that game.
Okay.
Just like completely fill, because then you can basically pause the game and just build out your entire city on every square inch of the map with the money.
Yeah.
Then turn it off, pause, and to watch it grow like 12 to 15,000 people each second. Get as high a population as you possibly can, and then right at the last moment, and you have to do this, lower I always lower the fire and the police budget, so that suddenly they don't tend to sense the fire budget too quickly, but suddenly like crime just explodes, and then you hit them with every single disaster, and the fires will spread out of control. And then once I actually have destroyed every zone, every road, and it's just the whole map is covered in that rubble.
Yeah.
Then I rebuild it out of the ashes.
Okay.
Because it makes my ego huge.
All right. I was always curious. I thought, I wondered if other people just did what I did. Just like, all right, that was fun. Load up something else.
No, that was my favorite game for years, and this was back during the time of, like, Super Smash TV and Mortal Kombat.
Yeah.
I loved that game more than them.
Wow.
I was not a very interesting child.
Well, anyway, we have some shout-outs to get through. First off, I would like to talk about Liminal States. This is a new science fiction novel from Zach Parsons, one of the writers for SomethingAwful.com. And I just got 2 review copies from him just today, so literally I haven't had a chance to crack it open. But it's I'm very interested in it because, one, the trailers, I'll put a link up to the trailers on Vimeo, are very, it's kind of like, it's got this very complex plot that's hinted at about time travel to the 19th century, to this film noir, sort of noir 40s, 50s period or something, and into the far dystopian future. And it looks, it's like a 400-page novel too. It looks pretty dense. So I'm looking forward to seeing what it's all about. But he's put a lot of work into his website. There's music for it, which is the music we're playing in this episode.
Right.
The intro and outro by, actually I'll mention that as Connell Rad, a ambient musician where you can get his music as free download. So if you want something to sort of chillax, if you like Boards of Canada, you'll like this guy. And you don't even know Boards of Canada, but it's for weird. It's weird music for weird people. But Liminal States looks really cool. I'm really looking forward to reading it and seeing what all the hubbub's about. And Tom, we have 2 copies of it. So Tom, you said you're going to read it.
Yeah, I'll read it.
You read it. So we'll have 2 reviews for it. So it's coming out in April. You can pre-order it now on Amazon. And so look forward to that.
Okay.
And first off, you had one sort of actually about destroying civilization and rebuilding.
Yeah, it's actually Caleb mentioned this in an earlier episode. There's a Flash game called Rebuild.
Yeah,
which is a Flash game about rebuilding a society after a zombie apocalypse.
Yeah,
which is mainly in this one city. Like you have to, you start with like a walled compound in the city with zombies all around you. And essentially, it's more like you don't actually shoot the zombies yourself. Like you send people out to either scavenge this area or kill all the zombies in this area. Then like you can reclaim it. Well, there's a sequel to it called Rebuild 2, which is essentially the same game, only they've updated a lot of the graphics. Some of the game, there's some extra gameplay. There's now some scenarios, like if you have a lab, like obviously unstable doctor comes in with claims that he has some kind of super project that can save your city.
Of course.
So you can do it, but he takes over the lab, so you can no longer use it. And he starts demanding special resources you have to go out into the city to find. Until you do that, he's not doing anything in the lab and nothing's getting done. But then again, the project might turn out to be great.
Yeah, interesting. Sounds like a good game. I've been kind of a noir hit lately. And because actually, when going back to the thing I'm doing, the Heretic Cycle, I kind of want to make fantasy noir, a little like Eberron, but the idea is like the main character in the Heretic Cycle, I don't do as like some mustache twirling villain or whatever. He sees himself as a career criminal. He's immortal, but he's not unkillable. He's just, can't die of old age. And so he just goes around from heist to heist, basically. And the rituals and building dungeons are all to support some sort of criminal scheme he's got on to support himself. He lives in the moment, in the now, not over the long period.
I have read this.
Yeah. So,
and actually, I will say that what I kind of like is that he is like the evil overlord that can lose everything and suddenly is just there's in mass confusion and just trying to run.
Yeah.
So, it's like I have all this power, but I also lost all my money, so I actually
have to start over. Yeah.
Yeah, I actually have to start over.
Yeah, I wanted somebody who doesn't just sit and accumulates wealth. He can periodically lose everything and start all over.
He has some
scratch.
downtimes.
Yeah, he can start over from scratch, and so in some ways he's like an adventurer.
And
and
I'm guessing also he has to deal with monsters because other people keep trying to kill him.
Well, yeah, exactly.
I still say
he is a heretic.
In fantasy world, monsters are the most oppressed people.
Oh yeah,
in history.
Do you read Order of the Stick?
I've read it. I don't not regular, but I do. I've read.
I can't remember where it in, but I think it's in one of the books. The Origin of the PCs. I think, or no, Darkness. The creation of the bad guys. They go into the backstories of the bad guys, the Lich and the Goblin Priest, Red Cloak, and they go into make a big point. Monsters are oppressed. The humans and other mortals just kill them all the time
and steal their shit
and are
celebrated for it.
So they're pretty pissed about that. That's actually kind of a thing. So I wanted to make this kind of I didn't stylize it like noir. Well, I mean, you can read it and find out. Anyways, but I have been on a noir kick lately. So the reason I bring this up is because there's two movies I've watched recently. I've rewatched. I've seen them. This isn't the first time I've seen them. The Brick and The Killers. The Killers is a Stanley Kubrick's first studio film, and it's about a heist at a racetrack, basically. And it stars Sterling Hayden, Concrete Jungle, a bunch of other great movies. And it's very 50s noir. There's voiceover narration, which Stanley Kubrick hated, and the studios insisted on him. But it's just this really tightly constructed, really well done heist movie. And one of the great scenes is and the characters are all great in it. Every crook who's in it is great. One of them is this guy who's just hired to cause a distraction at the bar at the racetrack to distract all the guards so the other character can sneak in. And he's Russian. And the guy, the Sterling Hayden goes to recruit him at the chess club. Which is an actual place that Stanley Kubrick hung out. They reconstruction on a set, obviously. But they just go to chess, 25 cents an hour to play chess, and he's just this Russian muscle guy's oh yes, I do this job for you. Oh right, okay, I break some heads, it's very cheerful about it. Very, obviously a very smart person. So the next one is Brick. Directed by Ryan Johnson, written by Ryan Johnson, and starring Joseph Gordon-Levitt. And it's high school neo-noirs. Came out in 2006. I saw it at the Moxie, and I have it on DVD, so it's my third or fourth time watching it. And it's just this amazingly weird and unique movie. The characters talk like noir characters. They got this really sparse, kind of tight dialogue, but they're still high schoolers. And it's about this, Joseph Gordon-Levitt's character's ex-girlfriend contacts him, then says, "No, you can't contact me. Go away." And then bad things start happening. So, you had in fact, speaking of bad things happening.
Yeah, I have. There's a video game. You know me and old video games.
Yep.
This one's actually from the mid to late '90s, called Titanic: Adventure Out of Time.
Yeah.
Which is the Titanic and time travel, kind of time travel. Not. I don't really know if it is. But you start out as as a British Secret Service agent. Who's now it's 1942 London, and World War II is on, and you've been pretty much destitute and poor ever since getting fired for failing the Titanic mission. And then suddenly London.
Jeez, Tom. Why'd you have to fail the Titanic mission?
I don't know.
Yeah.
But then suddenly London is bombed as you're looking through all your mementos of your career, and the windows blow out, and suddenly you're blown. It's like you're back in 1912 on the Titanic. And you have a chance to try to succeed on the mission. And, I mean, pretty not bad. I mean, the graphics were okay for the time. I will say that. And they recreate the ship very well. Mm-hmm. But it's when you find out what the object, what you failed to do, and then what your mission is.
How long does it take you to play through?
If you know what you're doing, maybe
not what first time.
My first time it was about 5 hours.
5 hours, so not a long game.
No, not a very long
game. Not a Deus Ex or
no.
Not a Mass Effect.
No, it's just a lot of mysteries and of course the cop version I had came with a strategy guide.
Oh, okay.
Which there's some puzzles, like some. There's a lot of the crew that just get you to do their job for them, for favors. Like this one guy.
It's just a standard video game. It's like, oh, I know you're trying to save the universe from evil and our genocide, but like, can you fucking do my gardening for me?
Of course, as a hero, yes.
Yeah, I'll give you some money.
But in this one, one of the guys, his job is to regulate the steam going through the from the boilers to the engines or whatever. He can never keep them in balance, so he's like, "Hey, if you can get these things in balance, I'll let you into the boiler rooms where you need to go."
Yeah.
So there you are, like, oh, for God's sake! And finally figured it out. It's like, oh, she's running much smoother now. Go on in.
Wow, that's pretty.
And
awesome.
I'm not gonna, just in case anyone actually decides to look for this game upon hearing.
Well, I'll have to find a link. I'll have to dig something up. So
yeah, but I won't tell you the ending. It's just if you get the best ending.
Yeah,
it's almost too good.
That's a kind of an Inception kind of thing, is it?
Yeah.
Is he dead? Is he dreaming? Is he in a coma? Who knows?
Yeah, and so yeah, there's that. Also, I think this is another different shout out, but we watch Allison Rift Tracks.
Yeah,
we watched one recently that I just think. The Breaking Dawn Part 1 Rift Tracks, which is the only possible way I could watch those movies.
Well, yeah. Why would you? I don't think there is another way to watch it, Tom.
And that one,
my mind rejects that.
Well, that one we were lucky to have booze.
Well, I would have watched it no matter what. It's an amazing thing. So
it really is, and really amazing that people still love it.
Yeah,
I just cannot. It's kind of like people that I hear that go to the theater not knowing what they want to watch. I cannot fathom it.
Oh yeah, that's the thing. For those of the listeners at home, this is something I brought up to Tom and Caleb, and they're just staggered by it. But I follow the movie, a little bit of the movie industry, screenwriting and all this other stuff, and one of the things I've read about is they do all this market research about moviegoers and, what kind of movies do they want? How do they see movies? To figure out what kind of movies will make them money, pretty obvious. And the thing they found out is the majority of people that go to see movies are obviously young men, either with their dates or with their friends, so that's why most movies are marketed towards young men, like the 14 to 24-year-old, because they have nothing better to do with their time, apparently. And the thing is, most people who go to see movies don't know what they're going to go see. They just go there, see what's playing, and then they pick there. And they don't necessarily know yet, what's this, Safe House? Yeah, sure, I'll see that, whatever.
Yeah. It defies comprehension to me.
Right. For us, the usual thing is we watch the trailers, we read the reviews, we'll just see.
Well, by the time we decide to go to a movie, we know a lot about it.
Yeah, exactly. But that's definitely the majority of them. Most people, it's a spur of the moment, or it's fuck it, let's just go out, or let's get the kids out of the house, or
yeah, well. Okay.
I mean, that makes more sense. Your parents just want to shove their kids into something, some kid movie playing or whatever to get them out of the house. But young adults with their own cars, that's their thing. And I know people yeah, of course I do that. Or you're probably maybe like us in the minority that are I will research everything and choose to go to see that and nothing else.
Indeed. And my brain, it's like reading a mythos book. I can't understand how that could happen.
Yep.
And also,
millions and millions of people love Breaking Dawn, and millions and millions of people view movies that way.
And it's not right.
Right. They just don't. Movies aren't as important to them as they are to you and I and other nerds.
Everyone in our group, basically.
Yeah, basically. So
also, go watch John Carter of Mars.
Really? You really care that much?
Yeah, I do. I want it to succeed.
You're a big Edgar Rice Burroughs fan? Or
no, I just kind of like movies like that.
That are full of monsters?
Hi, Ross. I'm Tom. Have we met?
It's like, well, when you say it like that, it's horrible. But yes. All right. Finally, I would like to mention one last thing. This is a free radio drama that I found on archive.org called Claiborne, which was actually made like 5 years ago in New Zealand and won a bunch of awards. And it's done like 93 parts, but each one is like 5-6 minutes long. You download the whole thing. It's like 500 megs, and it's 6-8 hours or whatever. Of a crazy, like, this American tourist goes to this town Claiborne and weird things start happening, and it's set in New Zealand, obviously, and it's got really good. I've listened to a few of them. It's got really good production values, and I'm really looking forward to listening to the rest. So it's totally free. So if you're totally out of RPPR, go download that and stop and then keep listening to RPPR. What am I doing? What? Oh my God! Never mind.
Yeah, and buy Ross's books.
Yeah, buy the Heretic Cycle. Oh my God! If you like to read my attempts at writing fantasy, then you need to.
And Ross owes me money, so he needs it.
Yeah. So thanks, Tom.
I'm just a loan shark.
I know.
I'm a pretty
it's because of the shark part. You didn't even know what loan sharks were. Until
like, I wouldn't be one of them.
Yeah.
Is that like a street shark?
Exactly. Jawsome.
Can I say Jawsome?
You can, Tom.
Then I will say Jawsome.
All right. Finally, we have the anecdotes, and this I'll just set this up, and Tom can tell.
Yeah, set the scene, Ross.
All right. This is a 3 or 4 part game. 3-part game that Tom ran for us on the off night. So we had a smaller group. We had me, Aaron, David. David, you remember from Bryson Springs.
Drew.
And
Caleb was in for one session.
This session too.
Yes.
And the thing is, this will not be an RPPR actual play. We are going to send these to Unspeakable, and the Unspeakable people or Shay and Ivy will put it up online whenever I get around to it.
And it will be mocked.
Well, it will be loved because it's awesome. Because the basic premise was we were Nazi saboteurs sent to America by submarine to dropped off on the East Coast by U-boat. Sorry, and we were given like 3 main missions. Well, the first 2 were to assassinate 2 eggheads, an engineer and a physicist. And the third one was to set up a resistance/terrorist group
made up of Americans,
right? To go, fuck with American interests. So all our characters, they're like a pool of 8 pregens. I picked the guy who was a Nazi occultist / historian, and then there was a sniper, a demolitions guy, blah 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 blah. So that is the premise, and part of it, one of our secondary tasks was to kidnap some FBI guys. So why don't you take it from there?
Oh yeah. So the party meeting up with their German intelligence contact, who had made contact with another guy who's we'll wait until that's released before I'll tell you everything.
Yeah.
But he wants him to kidnap these FBI agents. 3 of them are retired, 1's still active.
Yeah.
So they're going out. One of the retired ones, David and Aaron's characters, they basically split up into 2 teams. Because 2 of them are in Georgetown, so they're going to go scout the 2 in Georgetown first together.
Yeah, we're all in DC and Boston.
Yeah, we're all in DC. So 2 of them break off, and 2 of them go to one agent's house. That was you and.
Well, I think we were doing
you
something
and Drew.
else. Yeah.
Well, Drew and Caleb. You were off doing something else.
Yeah, I was. Yeah, just doing research.
But it was Aaron and David's character who it was the Gestapo interrogator and the SS heavy basically. So they're going to this house, and David, thinks of an idea, decides to pose as a door-to-door salesman. Bribes an actual salesman, gets his kit, and goes to this FBI agent's house and does the hard sell, stick foot in the door. But I don't think you understand the myriad of uses of these wonderful things. Well, and David sees that the retired FBI agent has 2 big German shepherds living in his house. And Aaron's character tries to go around to the back to see if he can hear what's going on. Of course, and he has no.
What was their original goal was just to scout,
scout the guy out,
case the area,
case the area.
This is during broad daylight.
In the middle of Georgetown.
Yeah.
So and David was in there just to get a view of the inside of the house, which well enough. But Aaron tries to sneak around back to see if he can hear what's going on. Fails his sneak check, so the 2 dogs hear someone coming around the house and start barking. And the guy, he's retired FBI, his dogs, these are watchdogs, obviously, so goes to see what's going on. So David decides to just kidnap the guy right then and there. Does knock him unconscious, pretty effectively with one hit, but that causes the dogs to turn on him. And not only did the dogs turn on him, but the dice decided to turn on him. David, I think he scored one successful hit. I mean, he has a gun, but he doesn't want to use it because that would alert the whole neighborhood to gunfire. So he decides to just punch the dogs. And he's actually the biggest guy of the group. But he just keeps miss after miss after miss, and the dogs keep getting hit after hit after hit. And David has the most hit points of any character, but, by the way, Aaron's hearing this, tries to go back around to the front door to get in, and does and perhaps succeeds in one of the most unlikely fast talk checks in history to convince this neighbor lady who's like, "Is something going on?" To like, no, ma'am, everything's fine. This is my uncle I'm visiting. He has bait was 5 in fast talk, and he rolls a
Base,
1.
Yeah.
So she falls for it, and he goes on trying to get inside while David is actually dropped to 0 hit points by these dogs. He wounds one, the other's completely unharmed, and they just savage him. Finally, Aaron gets the door open, and then the dogs see him breaking into the house, and they turn on Aaron. And Aaron starts getting savaged, and he tries to keep it unarmed, and scores, I think, one more hit.
He knocks one of the dogs out, or kills one of the dogs.
The wounded one.
Yeah.
But the uninjured one just, gnawing on him. So finally, Aaron realizing that a few more hits, and he's going down too, and I'm letting him know, the dogs are going to finish you off. The dog. So he finally breaks out his gun, fires. Of course, the whole neighborhood hears it. And he's a doctor. He manages to revive David. So, and then, for some reason, I don't know why, they then grab the unconscious FBI agent, run out of the house with him. They didn't do anything to try to conceal it. They're just carrying this unconscious guy out of the house in front of about 24 witnesses, just... they're the bystander syndrome, obviously. None of them rush in to intervene, but getting a great look at all of them as they throw this guy into the back of their truck, get in, and take off. And the whole... Caleb especially was just...
Caleb was there just because he had a night off and he was wanting to play, and he is just losing his mind at how insane this is, because he's like, we haven't spent 40 minutes on dog punching,
This has now become known as the dog punching
He drew
incident.
a memorial that I I put a photo of it on the RPPR group. And
to Rexy and Mr. Snufflekins,
yes.
the hero dogs who helped stop the Nazi invasion of 1940.
Oh my God! I think you were too lenient on David and Aaron. I think they should have been caught by the police. I think they should have had new characters. But because I was a player at the time, so I didn't say anything. But I was like, destroy them. That's what I would have.
Even
done.
I was like, well, you guys did that.
So of course, there's a room for just stunned I don't know how to process this.
No, we did. There was a moment of silence, not in reverence for the dogs, but just of shock.
Yeah, are we really doing this? We're really doing this.
And of course, David, tried to justify it too.
Yeah. No, I know. Any players got some rationale for their actions, but
they got the agent.
Yeah, they did get the agent.
But wow, just
dog punching. And with that note, I think this will be enough for episode 71. You got Wild Talents, and this is Ross Payton.
And I'm Tom Church.
And we'll see you guys next time.
We will.